Welcome to Fiction Audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribing would be greatly appreciated. If you have any recommendations for novels, comment below.
Please join my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/fictionaudiobook.
Chapter 1031, Chapter 1030, The Green Lantern Corps Wants to Strike. Orion frowned. He'd lived long enough to know this wasn't as simple as it appeared. The mission looked difficult, and there were clearly things Highfather wasn't saying. At least Highfather offered a measure of reassurance. The goddess of death recently led an expedition to another world. She's wounded and in a deep slumber, she won't interfere. Hearing that he wouldn't be crossing paths with Thea, Orion breathed easier. The power gap was one thing. His genuine rapport with her was another. Darkness still coiled within Orion's soul, and it hadn't faded simply because he'd been raised as Highfather's son. Living on New Genesis, surrounded by paragons of virtue, was its own form of torment. Thea had always been ambiguous about righteousness, which made her one of the few people Orion could talk to without filtering every word through a moral lens. No good versus evil framing, no scrutinizing whether his thoughts were sufficiently virtuous. If he was being honest, Orion's regard for Thea ran warmer than his feelings toward Diana. That was the darkness in his soul talking. Orion considered for a moment. If I may be so bold, was the goddess of death's expedition to the other world righteous? Highfather understood what his son was really asking. He suppressed a sigh. Good thing I didn't involve the Legion commanders. Even my adopted son, with all that darkness in his soul, is reluctant to back this. But Highfather didn't lie to his face. It was righteous. The goddess of death averted a crisis spanning two worlds and was gravely wounded in the service of justice. That made Orion feel even worse. Thea had bled for justice, and now he was supposed to exploit her incapacitation to sneak into her home and steal. By any measure, this was beneath him. If anyone else had ordered this, Orion would have put his massive fists to work making the argument. But his devotion to Highfather overrode his own moral compass. As you wish, Father. I'll bring the Earthling to New Genesis. Orion went to assemble his soldiers. The four main legions were off limits, he could only draw from Highfather's personal guard, selecting those with the highest loyalty. Meanwhile, on OA. Kyle Rayner had saved the universe, but like so many tired stories, the returning hero found no flowers waiting, only suspicion. Colleague Rayner, you claim you have absolutely no memory of your time behind the wall. That's difficult to accept. If you didn't restore the emotional spectrum reservoir, then where were you for 3 days? I believe you owe the Guardians a full account. One of the former Templar Guardians, now a sitting Guardian, opened the inquiry. He spoke for the rest of them. They all wanted to know what lay beyond the wall. Beings who'd lived for billions of years didn't take kindly to unknowns, and the source wall was their one remaining blind spot. Kyle Rayner had gone in and come back right under their noses. Their curiosity was consuming. Curiosity was the stated reason, at least. Whether avarice lurked beneath it, no one could say. I genuinely don't remember anything. I remember becoming a beam of white light and hitting the wall. The next thing I knew, I was coming out. If you hadn't told me, I'd have had no idea 3 days had passed. Kyle's temper was steady. This was already his third time explaining. But the little blue faces showed no sign of believing him. Only Ganthet chose to take him at his word. Kyle, you've been through a great deal. What are your plans going forward? Kyle looked down at the white lantern ring on his finger. The light was almost gone, a faint residue where a universe-spanning radiance had once burned. It could barely function as a flashlight. This was because he'd taken shortcuts to White Lantern status. Without the entity's emotional support, the entity, the embodiment of life itself, didn't truly recognize him. The only reason the ring still functioned at all was that each of the 7 entities had given him a small fragment of their power in their final moments, just enough to escape the source wall. Those emotional remnants sustained a feeble White Lantern at best. The White Lantern hasn't given up on me, so I won't give up on it. I intend to continue as a White Lantern. Thea won't be in this universe forever. It's my turn to protect this place. His voice carried quiet conviction. The words had barely left his mouth when Hal Jordan, having flown from Earth the moment the green rings came back online, burst into the chamber. He grabbed Kyle's arm. Kyle, come talk to everyone. Your voice carries weight right now. Without so much as a glance at the bewildered Guardians, Hal dragged Kyle toward the door. That man. How can he be so insufferably rude? The bearded Guardian was fuming. Ganthet simply smiled. Hal Jordan had always been like that. But a glance at the situation outside wiped the smile from his face. Kyle followed Hal out of the inner sanctum and into the Green Lantern Corps garrison. Every surviving Green Lantern in the universe had gathered here. At their peak, 3,600 sectors, 7,200 active lanterns, plus an equal number of reserves, along with honor guards, patrol units, and sentinels. Nearly 20,000 green lanterns in all. After disaster upon disaster, barely 1 in 10 remained. Counting the wounded and the barely functional, the total had fallen below 2,000. The crowd was restless. It took Kyle a while to piece together what was happening. The majority of the Green Lanterns wanted to go on strike. Not because of the casualty rate. Not because of the brutal conditions. They loved this universe. They loved their homes. They could endure hardship, fight enemies, lay down their lives, because they believed their service meant something. But that belief had shattered. We won't use the Green Lantern rings anymore. We'll maintain justice by our own means. It'll be harder, incomparably harder, but we refuse to keep accelerating the universe's destruction. A retired lantern spoke up, his voice ringing across the assembly. He'd lost a leg in combat years ago and had used a ring construct as a prosthesis ever since. Today, he stood on a crutch, struggling to keep upright. His ring finger was bare. More lanterns rallied behind him, far more than stood against. Ignorance had been one thing, but this crisis had shaken them to their cores. The universe had come within a hair's breadth of annihilation, and the root cause was their own unchecked consumption of the emotional spectrum. Guilt spread like wildfire, and their conviction in the justice of their cause had cracked wide open. In brightest day, in blackest night. No evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might. Beware my power, Green Lantern's light. Hal Jordan watched the scene with an ache that cut to the bone. He belted out the oath at full volume, trying to rekindle the courage of his comrades. But the rallying cry that had never once failed him fell flat. Even his closest friends didn't join in, answering with silence instead. Hal, we respect your courage. But can you really ignore what we now know and pick up that ring again? Don't you understand that every fraction of emotional power you squander brings the universe one step closer to oblivion? Kyle risked everything to save us this time. What about next time? Have you thought about that? Chapter 1032, Chapter 1031, Hal Jordan's Persistence. The words of the Green Lanterns around him cut into Hal's heart like blades. He could charge headlong at Necron without flinching, could face any enemy and lay down his life without hesitation, but this time, he was truly out of options. Hal Jordan, momentarily at a loss for words, turned to Kyle, hoping his fellow Earthling might say something on his behalf. He wasn't expecting miracles, just enough to steady the Corps' morale. With everyone on the verge of walking out and going home, he refused to watch the Green Lantern Corps crumble like this after countless eons fighting for universal peace. The Green Lantern Corps could be destroyed by an unstoppable enemy. But it should never be torn apart from within after its members lost faith. That was something Abin Sur, the one who'd entrusted Hal with his ring and this burden, would never have wanted to see. Kyle, could you share your thoughts? Following his gaze, the remaining Green Lanterns turned to Kyle as well. Amid a sea of green, his white suit stood out like a beacon. Kyle started, then caught himself mid-sentence, realizing that his earlier suggestion of continuing as the White Lantern had been impractical at best. He understood the Green Lantern's concerns completely. After all, he'd been the one who charged into the Source Wall on a near-suicide mission to save the universe. He knew exactly what choices he'd faced in that moment. If it happened again, would he do the same? Searching his conscience, he believed he would. But could anyone else? He was just a mortal. Kyle Rayner wasn't going to live for billions of years and crash through the wall again the next time the emotional spectrum ran dry. Billions of years from now, there wouldn't even be dust left of him. As for training a successor, passing the White Lantern down through generations, he entertained the thought for all of 2 seconds before abandoning it. The difficulty was absurd. He knew that from personal experience. He'd taken every shortcut imaginable, caught every lucky break, and still barely managed to become the White Lantern. The process couldn't be replicated. Without the same opportunities, someone would have to grind through it the hard way like Thea, each new emotion conquered doubling the difficulty, all the way until they'd unified all 7 lights. Kyle was fairly certain he couldn't even pass it on within his own generation, let alone across billions of years. If he had that kind of time, he'd be better off figuring out how to make himself immortal. At least that seemed simpler. So what was the answer? Maintain the Green Lantern Corps, keep fighting cosmic criminals, and wait for the emotional spectrum to deplete again in billions of years, triggering another universal catastrophe. Or start now, disband the Corps, seal the emotional drain, and give future generations a safe universe. 2 choices lay before Kyle. He knew that as the central figure of this crisis, the savior, the torchbearer, his words would sway a lot of people. But he hadn't made up his own mind. With everyone staring at him, Kyle opened and closed his mouth, unable to form a single word. This decision was too monumental. It shouldn't be his to make. The weight of a future threat and present duty pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. He couldn't take a stance. Not yet. Stall for time. Kyle decided he'd ask the unofficial Grand Commander of all 7 Corps, Thea, for her opinion afterward, and figure things out from there. His silence infuriated Hal Jordan. The furious Hal grabbed him by the collar. Are you giving up? You swore to the Green Lanterns too, Kyle. Green Lanterns forever, light through all ages. Did you forget? Without the Green Lanterns, how do we maintain order in the universe? Kyle was equally angry. He shoved Hal's hand away. And the consequences? Have you thought about the consequences? Your recklessness could get everyone killed. All I know is the universe needs the Green Lanterns right now. Needs us to keep the peace, to fight criminals. But you can't sacrifice the future. Sacrifice the entire universe. So we should just abandon everything we have. Ignore everyone who needs our help. Hal didn't wait for a reply. Fellow Lanterns, I'm worried about the universe's future too. But I think we should focus on the present, do what we're supposed to do, and do it well. The next depletion is hundreds of millions of years away. In all that time, if we pool our wisdom and work together, can't we find a way to prevent that future from happening? He raised his right hand high, letting everyone see the ring on his finger. It blazed with brilliant, radiant green light. Then, with every ounce of strength he had, he bellowed. Green Lanterns forever. Light through all ages. The plaza fell silent for several seconds. Then, slowly, others began raising their fists, echoing the rallying cry. More and more joined in. They'd accepted Hal Jordan's approach, deal with the present first, figure the rest out later. Watching his rally take hold, Hal exhaled a long breath of relief. Privately, he genuinely felt these people were overthinking it. Fretting about something billions of years away, walking around like the world had ended, completely unnecessary. Go find Thea and the others to figure it out afterward. That was his plan. Let the people with the bigger shoulders carry the bigger problems. Maybe what seemed impossible to him was a non-issue for someone else. Just as he was about to dispatch everyone back to their respective sectors to restore order, a thunderous explosion ripped through OA's outer defenses. Someone's attacking OA. Who has the nerve? The 1,000+ Green Lanterns went into a panic. Before the blackest night, they wouldn't have flinched. Back then, their ranks were full, morale was high, and they'd have taken on any challenger without a second thought. But after one catastrophe after another, they'd been battered into a state of near-constant anxiety. Like a flock of startled birds, they scrambled. All debate about the emotional spectrum was instantly shelved. Every single one of them slipped on their rings, ready to fight the incoming enemy to the death. Golden energy punched through OA's outer defenses. Orion, leading the forces of New Genesis, touched down on OA's surface. The Highfather's Guard were uniformly equipped, full armor, energy lances in hand. Those lances served for both close combat and firing energy beams. They were what had shattered OA's outer perimeter in a coordinated barrage. Thanks to the contributions of Thea and Diana, New Genesis's military had diversified considerably. Beyond the traditional cavalry, lancers, and archers, they'd developed mage and shield warrior units. The Guard were New Genesis's elite. Their individual combat power generally exceeded that of the 4 great legions, and their devotion to Highfather bordered on fanatical. Hal Jordan had never met Orion, but the Flash had fought alongside the new gods on Earth, too, and had described Orion's appearance to him. The Guard's equipment looked familiar too. These didn't seem like enemies, so why had they blasted through OA's defenses? You're with the new gods. Why are you here on OA? Hal flew up to Orion's eye level. Orion wore a helmet that exposed only his jaw. His voice was low and heavy. I come on the orders of Highfather. He wishes to see this Earthling. He pointed straight at Kyle Rayner in the crowd. One white suit in a sea of green, impossible to miss. Hal Jordan's temper flared right back up. The visitor's tone was blunt, and he'd brought an army. This didn't look like a diplomatic visit. Chapter 1033, Chapter 1032, New Genesis versus the Green Lantern Corps. What does your Highfather want with Kyle? You have no right to know Highfather's divine will. Hal Jordan laughed in disbelief. His ring shifted into combat mode automatically. The Green Lantern Corps doesn't fear you. I won't let you take my fellow lantern. The remaining Green Lanterns moved into battle formation as well. Setting aside the question of whether to keep using the rings, Kyle Rayner, the White Lantern, absolutely could not be taken. The name, Torchbearer, was already legendary across all 7 Lantern Corps. Having their hero seized on their own doorstep, at their own headquarters. Even the most timid among them would put up a fight. The Lanterns figured the visitors had brought an army to take someone by force, and they weren't wrong. The two sides were on a collision course. While the Lanterns raised their defenses, the Guard readied themselves in kind. Thea hadn't restricted the weave, so magic had spread widely across New Genesis. As an elite force, the Guard counted plenty of mages in their ranks, powerful ones, at that. Several of the strongest mages began channeling, magical energy rolling off their bodies in waves. The new god's pride made them look down on the Green Lantern Corps without a shred of concern. If these people wanted to resist, then the Guard would show them what they were dealing with. Of the 100,000 guards, nearly 10,000 were high-tier mages, and among them were several archmages. They began chanting incantations in booming voices while the high-tier mages coordinated to inscribe spell arrays. The distinctive radiance of legendary spells began to glow, magical power drawn from the weave as the spells took rapid shape. Just as the two sides were about to clash, 10 guardians flew out between them. Stop this. New gods, do you want to start a war? Ganthet glared at the invaders without a hint of fear. Orion sized him up. He and the little blue man seemed roughly evenly matched. If he unleashed part of his dark nature, he could definitely beat this one, but if all the little blue men were at a similar level, 10 of them would be too many. 3, he could handle. Maybe. To preserve what little righteousness his side could still claim, Orion explained his purpose. Unacceptable. Raynor is one of ours, we won't hand him over to you. Before Ganthet could weigh the strategic implications, several of his more impulsive fellow guardians flatly refused. Shut your mouths. He snapped at the meddlesome little blue men, then turned back to Orion. Why would Highfather issue such an order? Is this the will of New Genesis as a whole, or Highfather's alone? Old and shrewd, Ganthet was nothing like the 8 recluses who'd spent hundreds of millions of years guarding the First Lantern. He needed to determine where this order originated, whether it represented New Genesis's collective stance or Highfather's personal agenda, and by extension, whether Thea and Diana were friends or enemies. Hand over the Earthling. All you need to know is that we act in the name of justice. Orion deflected the question and pressed harder. I'll go with them. Kyle didn't want his presence to spark a battle and started to step forward, but Sed held him back. Kyle, please wait. This is more complicated than it appears, she said quietly. Kyle had always respected Ganthet and Sed, so he stayed put. If you stand in our way, you are the enemy. Are you prepared to face the wrath of the new gods? Orion roared. Ganthet's expression was grim. You are far too arrogant, new god. I am older than you can fathom. When Highfather and Darkseid fought their first great war, I had already lived for countless ages. Your threats are meaningless and laughable in my eyes. Watching the feed from the underworld, Thea pressed a palm to her face. Ganthet was actually a decent person, devoted, principled, morally grounded. Compared to his colleagues, he had plenty of virtues. Just one flaw, the man loved to boast. He couldn't help himself. Always inflating things. Claiming the Spectre was beneath him, that Superman was nothing special, and now this, pulling seniority on Orion. The subtext of his little speech was that Highfather and Darkseid were children in his eyes. As if age and power had anything to do with each other. Spoiler, they really didn't. No one was stupid enough to miss the insult. Ganthet's words ignited the guard's fury. These were soldiers willing to die for Highfather, and hearing someone disrespect him like that sent them over the edge. Without hesitation, they attacked. 3 legendary spells that had been charging up fired simultaneously, 2 meteor storms and a spell that summoned a storm of lightning. Light and shadow crisscrossed as the battle erupted in full. After the spells landed, the mages collectively pulled back to the rear to prepare a second volley. The guards hefted their javelins and hurled them at the Green Lanterns, who'd thrown up a wall of constructs. Diana's contributions to New Genesis's military doctrine were evident. The strategy maximized ranged strikes against the enemy, spell barrages first, then javelin volleys. After that, the shield warriors advanced while the cavalry flanked. This classical Greek city-state approach to warfare was a natural fit for the new god's combat style. Following the magic and javelin salvos, the guards' lances fired row after row of energy beams. By the time the battered Green Lanterns fought through to melee range, they were met by well-drilled shield warriors. 100,000 trained, fully equipped elite guards against 1,000 demoralized Green Lanterns. The result was a slaughter. Several of the guard's strongest warriors tied down the Guardians while Orion pressed his assault against Ganthet and said, "You commit this atrocity and still dare call yourselves righteous?" Sed screamed in fury. Orion said nothing. He knew the Green Lanterns were righteous heroes, but he had no choice. He had to complete the mission. To avoid drawing Thea and Diana into the conflict and triggering an all-out war between the Underworld and New Genesis, he intended to finish this fast. A thread of darkness slithered from the deepest part of his soul, the evil power he'd been born with, inherited from Darkseid's bloodline. Orion's face twisted into a snarl, and a single blow sent Sed flying. Across the battlefield, the Lanterns were losing on every front. Outnumbered 100 to 1 and facing elite troops, their casualty count climbed relentlessly. Stop. All of you, stop. I'll go with you. Stop killing innocent people. Kyle Rayner shouted in rage. He couldn't believe his eyes. Familiar green lanterns lay in pools of blood around him. This was how New Genesis's self-proclaimed champions of justice upheld their ideals. Ha! Out of my way, old man. Orion, dark energy swirling across his face, punched Ganthet aside, then turned to Kyle. He drew several deep breaths, forcibly suppressing the violence surging inside him. Please come with me. Don't keep Highfather waiting. Orion's voice was low and measured. Kyle felt nothing but revulsion for this Highfather of theirs. Revulsion and a growing hatred. Let me revive my comrades first. Kyle gave Orion no warmth. Silently, he reached out to his ring. The White Lantern ring could resurrect the dead. That power was a major reason he'd endured so much hardship to earn the ring's acceptance in the first place. But this was his first time actually using the resurrection function. The ring's glow was faint. Dozens of silver threads spiraled out from it, connecting to the bodies of the fallen lanterns. Chapter 1034, Chapter 1033, Highfather takes the field. From the underworld, Thea watched the scene with keen interest. Kyle Rayner believed the resurrection was a power of the White Lantern ring alone. He was wrong. The ring was merely a conduit, the life equation was the true engine driving it. The ability was produced by the two forces working in tandem. Within the white light, traces of a higher-order energy mingled with raw life force. The fallen lantern's heartbeats began to return, and success seemed moments away, when something went wrong. The white light grew hotter and hotter. It wasn't content to merely revive the dead. It wanted to change things. To rewrite the rules by which this world operated. What's happening? Kyle Rayner cried out in alarm. Everyone on OA was bathed in light warmer than sunlight. The dead rose to their feet. The Highfather's guard lowered their weapons. In an instant, every grievance between them seemed to vanish, as though they were all about to become one big happy family. This wasn't right. This state was absolutely wrong. Kyle Rayner didn't know of any version of togetherness that was achieved through brainwashing. He struggled to rein in the ring, but it completely ignored his commands, smashing through his control like a flood through a plank of driftwood. The white light over OA grew blinding. Apart from a few Guardians, Orion, and two Archmages who were still resisting, everyone else, Lanterns and Highfather's guard alike, wore warm, serene expressions, as if every pain they'd ever known had been forgotten. Deeply unsettling. Watching from the underworld, Thea was caught off guard too, which only strengthened her resolve to stay on the sidelines. She was content to watch. Someone else, however, was not. Amid the searing white radiance, Kyle heard a thunderous boom beside his ear. He recognized it immediately, a boom tube from New Genesis. A deep, commanding voice rang out, "Child, take my hand. Let me help you bear this burden." The newcomer was tall, imposing, radiating an innate majesty, the unmistakable bearing of a sovereign born to rule. Kyle had never met him, but he recognized the man at once. Highfather. Highfather himself had come. Kyle was furious at New Genesis's heavy-handed actions. His disgust ran deep. But he couldn't refuse Highfather's help. His White Lantern ring was completely out of control, like an unbridled stallion, and it was actively rewriting reality. Kyle couldn't tell whether the problem was his own insufficient strength, a fundamental lack of mastery over the ring, or something else entirely. Incalculable amounts of life force poured outward. Reviving the dead had been his intention, but the blissed-out days afflicting everyone was definitely not. Worse still, he noticed that the metal and stone of OA itself had begun to stir with faint signs of life, and the effect was spreading outward into the cosmos. Limited by his own realm, Kyle couldn't perceive the full scope of what was happening. But Thea could see it clearly. The life equation was absurdly potent in its own right. Like the anti-life equation, it possessed the ability to overwrite free will. Beyond that, it could bestow life upon all matter. It sounded wonderful in theory, but if every single thing in the universe became alive, the result would be total chaos. It was neither good nor evil. It simply represented the force of life in its purest form. And it was precisely this power that had driven Highfather to throw aside all restraint and intervene personally. His reasoning wasn't hard to guess: strike while the iron was hot, exploit the narrow window before anyone else was ready, and seize the equation. Thea's reaction was a silent, dry laugh. Highfather had lost the composure and wisdom he was famous for. He'd been consumed by the allure of power. Whether the life equation and the anti-life equation were relics left behind by God remained unknown. Where the source energies of life and anti-life originated, whether they'd always existed or came from some higher plane, all of it was still a mystery. But one thing Thea knew for certain: unrestrained life was fundamentally incompatible with the laws of the universe. How would Highfather contain the life equation once he had it? Through righteousness. And how would Darkseid master the anti-life equation? Through evil. Perhaps both of them believed they could. But Thea was certain they were deluding themselves. Only she, the goddess of death, could properly wield and restrain the life equation. And the anti-life equation would require a deity of life to control. Opposing forces sustaining each other, maintaining balance, preventing either from spiraling out of control. Despite seeing all of this, Thea made no move to intervene. Every choice was theirs to make. Highfather was an excellent leader in many respects, charismatic, perpetually compassionate and caring. If the stakes had been lower, Thea might have extended a hand. But he stood in the way of Diana's path forward. There was only one mantle of justice, and under that constraint, not fanning the flames was already more than generous. He'd taken this step of his own volition. No one could undo that for him. And Thea could see it, a hairline crack, nearly imperceptible, forming in the foundation of Highfather's righteousness. She watched from a distance as Highfather used sheer divine power to force the life equation into submission. The process was grueling, but the power coursing through him only deepened his intoxication. Kyle Rayner, please come with me. This power is far too dangerous. It doesn't belong in this universe. Highfather's voice was still warm, the kind that instinctively put people at ease. There was no denying it, Highfather was impressive. Majesty and compassion in equal measure. A single glance was enough to inspire trust. Even Kyle Rayner, who'd been seething at New Genesis, found himself swayed by Highfather's presence. The earlier brutality. He automatically pinned that on Orion. Probably just the man's rough methods, poor handling of the situation, that sort of thing. Kyle nodded in agreement. Highfather said nothing more, opened a boom tube, and departed with his forces for New Genesis. Young man, please wait here briefly. I will explain everything, Highfather said, then closed his eyes and said nothing more. It was Kyle's first time on New Genesis. The environment was breathtaking, but he had no appetite for sightseeing. The near catastrophe he'd just witnessed still had him shaken to his core. The power of life, uncontrolled and uncontrollable, was this why Thea, despite possessing the White Lantern, had never gone on a resurrection spree. He'd been reckless. Kyle cursed himself bitterly. He'd crudely triggered the resurrection without thinking through the consequences. If Highfather hadn't intervened, the fallout would have been unimaginable. While Kyle was filling in the blanks on his own, Highfather was carefully composing his words. His true body had entered the wider universe, drawing attention from multiple quarters. His own Legion commanders had almost certainly noticed. To fend off outside forces eyeing the power, he needed to unify his inner circle first. Some commanders might question the rashness of his actions. That was manageable, he could smooth it over. Diana, however, was another matter entirely. He couldn't argue with her, couldn't discipline her, and she was the single most difficult variable in this equation. Highfather was getting a headache. Sure enough, not a minute later, the first person through the door was Diana. The warrior goddess stormed in, shoving the doors open, and strode forward with purpose. Chapter 1035, Chapter 1034, New Genesis's Sophistry. At the final moment of OA's crisis, Hal Jordan had managed to contact Batman on Earth. Batman reached out to Red Robin, who contacted Wonder Girl Cassie, who went to find Diana. As Diana's protege, Cassie had the right to enter Themyscira. New Genesis's army attacking OA, Diana could barely believe it at first. She assumed her protege was joking, right up until Highfather personally took the field. After that, the truth was undeniable. Unlike Thea, Diana wasn't exactly incapable of teleportation. As the commander of the Magic Legion, she'd put in at least some practice. But her skills were rough at best, teleporting herself all the way to OA would have been a serious ordeal. However, Highfather hadn't lingered on OA. He'd returned to New Genesis shortly after, and Diana, after a moment's hesitation, chose not to alert Thea. To prevent the situation from escalating into open war, she activated a boom tube alone and headed back to New Genesis to confront Highfather directly. In truth, Highfather held Diana in very high regard. Selfless, just, a champion of the weak, she was practically a younger version of himself. And Diana was still young, with enormous room to grow. But today's meeting got off to a rocky start. Diana spotted Kyle Rayner sitting unrestrained, and some of the tension left her shoulders. She didn't want to blow this up either. With a slight bow, she asked, "Your Majesty, why did you attack OA?" Highfather weighed every single word. He didn't want to trigger a full-scale war between New Genesis and the underworld. These days, only two powers could field endless waves of troops without restraint, Hell and the underworld. Both had inexhaustible reserves of soldiers. The underworld's war potential was especially terrifying. Every time one of Highfather's soldiers died, the underworld gained one more. If the conflict dragged on, no one could withstand that kind of attrition. New Genesis and Apocalypse alike had finite numbers of elite warriors, no matter how formidable they were individually. Darkseid, currently wrestling with demons on Apocalypse, was a living example. Wave after wave of endless demons had ground the new gods down to exhaustion. Darkseid himself had taken the field multiple times, barely holding the demon armies at bay. Highfather hoped to use the framework of justice to keep Diana in check. His instincts were sharp. As long as Diana opposed the idea, Thea wouldn't declare war. For the sake of justice. This earthling possesses a weapon that could end all evil. His phrasing was excruciatingly careful. Please, give me a moment. The Legion commanders will arrive shortly, and I will provide a convincing explanation for this operation, Highfather said with evident sincerity. Diana chose not to press further. She exchanged a few words with Kyle, then sat down to rest. The battle against Krona had taken a heavy toll on her as well. Her current combat power was less than half of what it had been at her peak, and recovery would take time. Before long, the Legion commanders, Metron in his advisory role, and several new gods holding specific administrative posts had all assembled. They bowed to Highfather in turn. Though his personal power surpassed everyone present, New Genesis was not Apocalypse, this was a democratic system. Even as the strongest warrior and supreme leader, Highfather owed them an explanation. Highfather cleared his throat and gestured toward Kyle. Allow me to introduce our guest. This mortal is Kyle Rayner. His universe recently suffered a catastrophe, and it was he who stepped forward to avert disaster. I strive to protect all universes, that is my duty and my honor. Regrettably, this crisis came too suddenly. Even I was powerless to act, and it was this mortal who resolved it. He has earned our respect. Kyle felt a twinge of distaste. Highfather kept saying mortal as casually as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. In Highfather's mind, mortals and gods occupied two entirely different tiers, as if that were simply the natural order. By comparison, Thea's casual, easy confidence was far more comfortable to be around. As for Highfather's talk of the universal crisis, Kyle was equally unimpressed. His sacrifice to save the universe had nothing to do with New Genesis. The condescending tone made it sound as though everything he'd endured had been in pursuit of their divine approval. What had been an 80-point first impression instantly dropped by 30. The Green Lantern Corps' reckless use of emotions very nearly caused universal annihilation. This was a threat I should have recognized but failed to. Highfather was still mid-explanation when Diana cut him off. That's still no justification for assaulting OA. The Green Lantern Corps has always upheld universal justice. How is that wrong? Diana's interjection sent a ripple through the assembled commanders. Today's meeting was clearly not routine. Her tone, bordering on accusation, made several of them uneasy. New Genesis had always championed itself as a beacon of justice. Evil could devour its own, but justice was supposed to stand united. Was that belief about to crack today? They stayed silent, waiting for Highfather to offer a credible explanation. My actions were hasty, but I am certain they were correct, Highfather said with gravity. Kyle couldn't hold back any longer. Nonsense. Is the Green Lantern Corps some gang of criminals? They've made enormous contributions to universal peace, saved countless lives, and your army put them to the sword. The assembled new gods exchanged startled glances. Had Highfather truly done something so out of character? I acknowledge that errors were made in this matter. No, Father. The fault is mine. I accept full responsibility. At the critical moment, Orion, his adopted son, stepped forward to take the blame. He had darkness in his soul. If he did a bit of killing and arson, everyone would find it perfectly understandable. His sudden intervention left Diana and Kyle unsure of where to direct their anger. Diana hadn't been present for the attack. The news had passed from Batman to Cassie to her, and details had inevitably shifted along the way. She turned to Kyle for his perspective. Kyle had no insight into the political maneuvering behind the scenes. He fell silent. With his adopted son absorbing the blame, Highfather managed to paper over the assault on OA. He moved directly to the main point. Kyle Rayner carries a power of tremendous magnitude, a weapon critical to our fight against evil. If I'm not mistaken, it is the life equation. It possesses a force no mortal can withstand. It will correct the universe. The life equation will help us reshape reality into what we want it to be. It is the only weapon that can end evil once and for all. Highfather fixed his gaze on Kyle and spoke with deliberate weight. Mortal, the life equation exceeds your capacity. Only a god can wield it. Diana studied Highfather as if seeing him for the first time, examining every detail of his face. She was no fool, far from it. Highfather was making a play for the prize. Chapter 1036, Chapter 1035, The Break. Only a god can wield it, what nonsense. If Highfather could use it, Thea obviously could too. He'd simply moved faster and had the gall to abduct someone outright. The timing was calculated as well, everyone was returning wounded from the Marvel expedition. Highfather had created a fait accompli, never giving them a chance to negotiate or object. Your Majesty's wisdom and foresight are truly admirable. The words dripped with bitterness. Diana was furious, her tone turning cold. After considerable deliberation, she still chose not to use the grand summoning to call Thea. Highfather was observing her expression just as closely. When he saw her ultimately suppress her anger, he knew the matter was settled. He was certain that Diana would grow distant from him after this, that was inevitable. With Thea in the picture, no amount of goodwill toward Diana would change anything. Not becoming outright enemies was the best he could hope for. But this move had burned through every ounce of goodwill and accumulated favor he'd ever built with her. Kyle, what's your opinion? Highfather turned to Kyle. Cutting off the man's finger and simply taking the ring wasn't an option, not with everyone watching. He needed the handover to appear voluntary. Diana closed her eyes and said nothing. Kyle read between the lines and began to grasp the dynamics at play. After a moment's thought. I can feel the ring gradually consuming me. It's trying to reshape me, turn me into something else. Maybe giving it to you is the right call. He met Highfather's gaze. Can you guarantee the ring and that whatever equation you people keep talking about will be used for justice? I guarantee it. I am Highfather, champion of justice. You need not doubt that. Kyle nodded slowly. He could see that Diana didn't want to fight Highfather, had even sacrificed some of her own and Thea's interests to avoid it. To him, that was the mark of a true hero. Today had already brought too much bloodshed, too much suffering. He was exhausted. Let the ring go. Let the gods sort it out. Perhaps you could retain the White Lantern's power. Diana suggested, testing the possibility. Kyle shook his head. I don't think so. I can feel them blending together. Let me rest for a few days. He pulled the White Lantern ring from the middle finger of his right hand. The brilliant white light vanished. Without a bearer, the ring was nothing more than a band of faintly glimmering silver. And Kyle Rayner instantly reverted to an ordinary mortal. The prolonged burden of channeling multiple emotions had drained his spirit to the breaking point. His legs buckled, and he nearly collapsed. But he steadied himself and pressed the White Lantern ring into Highfather's hand. It's yours now. Don't forget your promise. Shall I take you back to Earth? Diana offered. Kyle hesitated, then produced his Green Lantern ring and put it on. A measure of mental energy returned. He declined to leave, he wanted to see what Highfather would do with it. Disregarding the vast gap in their power, he declared, I'm going to watch him. I want to see what changes my sacrifice brings to the world. Ugga, ? Highfather's trusted commander of the Cavalry Legion, let out a sharp, disapproving snort at Kyle's audacity in demanding to monitor Highfather. But Diana stood firm, and Ugga held his tongue. He knew better than to pick that fight. Diana had someone behind her, and it wasn't worth manufacturing conflict over a few words. Ugga saw the situation clearly. Highfather had secured the prize. Letting others talk, letting them score a few verbal points, that was a small price to pay. Highfather ignored his subordinate's reaction and accepted the White Lantern ring with care. The ring, predictably, rejected him. But he crushed its resistance with raw divine power. The two forces entered a brief standoff. Without a bearer, the ring couldn't hold out. In less than a minute, Highfather overpowered it completely. The ring dissolved into a stream of white light and flowed into Highfather's scepter. Ah! A surge of overwhelming energy coursed from the scepter into Highfather's body. His aura climbed steadily higher. Highfather, who had long been the weakest among his peers at the peak tier, rocketed upward with the life equations in fusion, reaching the pinnacle of multiversal power. The boost was somewhat unstable, but his overall strength had multiplied several times over. The scepter, once golden, had turned silver-white. A long time passed before Highfather opened his eyes. At last, I have the power to enforce true justice. From this day forward, there will be no more evil in the universe. Crime will be eradicated, and all living beings will know peace. His voice sounded distorted, muffled, as if filtered through a layer of cloth. The compassion and mercy that had always defined him were gone. All that remained in his eyes was a blazing intensity, warrior's fire, and something else, a searing hunger that had been suppressed for far too long. The assembled new gods said nothing, each silently gauging what Highfather's transformation might mean. Was he planning to attack Apocalypse? The idea wasn't unreasonable in principle, but Apocalypse was a war zone drowning in chaos. Bullying the Green Lantern Corps was one thing, but deploying New Genesis's soldiers to Apocalypse. The numerical advantage would evaporate, especially factoring in the endless legions of demons. Striking now would be far from a wise move. But Ugga, ? Was the first to step forward. He dropped to one knee. The Cavalry Legion awaits your command. The Melee Legion and Archer Legion followed suit, pledging their allegiance. Diana stood ramrod straight, her gaze clear and unwavering as she watched Highfather in silence. The remaining new gods lacked her resolve. One by one, they stepped forward and voiced their obedience. Highfather didn't so much as glance at Diana. He acted as though she weren't in the room. We will first conduct a test of my vision. Once you see the results, you will believe in my plan wholeheartedly. Highfather was practically vibrating with excitement. He opened a boom tube. The assembled new gods exchanged uneasy looks. This was not the Highfather they knew, but had no choice except to follow. How is Thea doing? Kyle asked Diana quietly, just before stepping into the tube. Despite his skepticism about Saint Walker's blind devotion, Kyle found himself wishing more than ever that Thea, who seemed unreliable but always came through when it mattered, could be here right now. Her injuries need time to heal. After all, she bore the brunt of the battle against Krona. But even at full strength, she can't easily intervene here. None of us can. So. I'm truly sorry. Diana's answer was deliberately vague. In her heart, she didn't want Highfather and Thea to go to war. It's not your fault. Not any of yours. You are heroes, through and through, Kyle said softly, then stepped calmly into the boom tube. They emerged onto a planet with a moderately developed civilization. Its inhabitants were humanoid, just larger than Earthlings, heights of 2 meters, 3 meters, and more were commonplace. Diana knew her time on New Genesis had reached its end. Highfather's actions had driven their relationship to a breaking point beyond repair. For now, she simply watched. If Highfather's next move didn't cross too many lines, she would leave quietly to avoid further confrontation. Highfather stood tall, arms spread wide, his back to the assembled new gods, the silver-white scepter raised high. Chapter 1037, Chapter 1036, Thea enters the scene. Gods, behold this planet. The citizens of Muz, famed across the cosmos for their belligerence. They know neither reverence nor humility, and the very concept of glory is foreign to them. Now witness what the life equation can achieve in my hands. As he channeled divine power into the tip of his scepter, forcibly driving the life equation into action, countless rays of white light erupted outward. The world lost all color. Everything within sight turned a blinding white, shadows vanishing entirely. The radiance pouring from the scepter outshone a star 10,000-fold, and the new gods had no choice but to shield their eyes. People of Muz, you have been chosen. You have been blessed. You are the first in all the cosmos to receive salvation. Rejoice. Celebrate. From this day forward, you shall be reborn. You were once lesser, and I will elevate you. You were once lost, and I will give you purpose. You were once fragile, and I will make you strong. I am Highfather. From this day forward, every accident of birth shall be erased. All shall receive power equally. It is I who bestow it upon you. The light reached a blinding crescendo. Even Metron, lounging on his Mobius chair with his usual air of superiority, had to throw up a hand to shield his eyes. He asked with some uncertainty, did it work? Ha! The God of knowledge doesn't know the answer. The life equation is beyond even your knowledge, isn't it? It worked. The cosmos will be saved because of this. Highfather's laughter rolled like thunder. As the white light fell away, the scene that emerged left every new god frozen in horror. Every sentient being on the planet had been remade. Fine robes and rags alike had vanished. The boundaries of class were gone entirely. Regardless of former station, every last one of them now wore identical uniforms, kneeling reverently toward Highfather. The disparities they'd been born with had been forcibly rewritten. There were no longer any distinctions among the citizens of Muz. They had all become soldiers, loyal to Highfather alone. And that wasn't even the worst of it. You erased their personalities. You overrode the will of every single one of them. Diana was the highest realm deity present aside from Highfather, and she saw the truth at a glance. The warrior goddess had never been this furious. She was utterly devastated, unable to comprehend how Highfather, always so compassionate, so just, could have done this. To disregard the will of every living being on an entire world and forcibly rewrite their minds. What he'd done was worse than brainwashing. Every individual's form of existence had been overwritten. Height, weight, build, all gone. Lifetimes of memories, experiences, and knowledge had been wiped clean. They were no longer themselves. The process was irreversible. An entire planet. Over 1 billion sentient beings, erased in a single thought, transformed into blessed soldiers. The tragedy of it. The sheer evil. Diana drew her sword with a sharp ring of steel and leveled it at Highfather. Where is your justice? Erasing their personalities, is that your justice? Answer me. She wasn't alone. The other new gods stared at the transformed citizens of Muz with open horror, then turned those same stares on Highfather. Even Uga was wondering whether Highfather had been corrupted by that equation. Erasing the personalities of every intelligent being on an entire planet. How was that any different from killing them? But Highfather's response left Diana, and every new god, bitterly disappointed. This is a necessary step. Only through this can I enforce my justice, my fairness. Why do you all look so troubled? Are you blind? Abolishing every class distinction, giving everyone an equal starting point, how is that a bad thing? This is your fairness. Your justice. You've overridden their individual wills completely. How are you any different from Darkseid? Diana was beside herself with rage. Kyle finally grasped what had happened. He regretted handing over the White Lantern and despised this kind of evil committed in the name of righteousness. Highfather was still expounding his theory. Replacing everyone's idea of justice with my own, what's wrong with that? Giving them responsibility, preventing infighting, stamping out all evil, isn't that justice? What about the balance of all things? Using this method to eliminate every dissenting voice, what difference is there between justice and evil? Your Majesty, come to your senses. The power has clouded your judgment. Diana kept trying to reason with him. Lady Canopy of the Archer Legion and Malhedron of the Melee Legion could both see that something was deeply wrong with Highfather and spoke up in support of Diana. Under normal circumstances, Highfather would have respected their opinions. 3 of the 4 Legion commanders opposed him. By any measure, the writing was on the wall. But he was not himself today. Balance. You've been brainwashed by the Death Goddess and her theories. What does life need? Do they need vengeance, conflict, and injustice? Shroud it all in justice, that's how you set them free. Free will is sacred. Diana was still mindful of their relationship, tempering her words as counsel rather than condemnation. Kyle had no such restraint. He pointed straight at Highfather's face and let loose. The life equation had amplified Highfather's power enormously, but it had also sent his psyche into collapse. Rationality had all but evaporated. Seeing a mere mortal dare to shout at him, he raised his scepter without a second thought. Your mind needs purifying too. Let me erase all of your suffering. A wall of white light slammed toward Kyle. Diana raised her shield to block, but a figure stepped out of thin air directly in front of her, one hand raised, catching the blast with casual ease. The white light flinched before her. As the genuine White Lantern, the life equation embedded in that light couldn't touch her in the slightest. With weapons drawn on both sides, Thea finally made her entrance. She wore her Goddess of Death regalia, standing before Highfather once more, regarding her former superior with a tangle of emotions. She caught the beam of white light as if snatching a toy, squeezed gently, and crushed it to nothing. Ranked 9th in the death hierarchy, she could now tap into a fraction of death of the endless power. Her bottleneck had broken, and her strength was climbing at a staggering rate every day. She'd already surpassed peak multiversal and was steadily advancing toward omniversal. Forget Highfather with his unstable grip on the life equation and his wildly fluctuating power, even if he'd fully stabilized, he wouldn't have stood a chance against her. What looked like a gap of half a tier was in reality an uncrossable chasm. Where Thea's aura had once been sharp and imposing, it was now settling into something almost mundane. Compared to Highfather's energy spilling out in every direction, she looked almost mortal with her power drawn entirely inward. Your Majesty, it's been a while. And everyone else, you all look well. She greeted the assembled gods with easy familiarity. Chapter 1038, Chapter 1037, Curtain Falls. The new gods returned her greeting with varying degrees of awkwardness. They'd become deities, none of them were fools. Unlike the rank-and-file soldiers and civilians who worshipped Highfather with fanatical devotion, this group felt no such reverence. The difference between them and Highfather was simply how many godhoods each possessed. Expecting one god to revere another was unrealistic. Setting aside the question of Thea's combat power, the death godhood alone demanded respect. Any one of them could end up in her hands someday. Maintaining good relations was never a mistake. Nobody was about to suck up to her, but absent any major conflict of interest, nobody wanted to antagonize her either. Highfather watched the standoff dissolve like it was nothing and felt his fury mount. The resentment he'd bottled up for so long finally erupted. You. It's you. You betrayed me, and you dare show your face. He jabbed a finger at his subordinates. Seize her, she's the source of all this evil. Then he led the charge himself, scepter swinging. The new gods exchanged weary glances. They'd intended to pretend they hadn't heard, but Uga and Orion obeyed the order and surged forward, leaving the rest no choice but to join the assault. Uga's warhammer. Lady Canopy's bow. An assortment of short swords, fists, and a laser from Metron's chair, everything converged on Thea. The biggest threat, of course, was still Highfather. His grip on the life equation was forced, but it still blazed with towering radiance. Combined with Highfather's own combat power and a squad of helpers, he felt confident he was gaining the upper hand. At least, that was how it felt to him. Thea's realm and combat strength dwarfed them all. Highfather with his commandeered life equation qualified as peak multiversal at best. The other new gods, putting in the minimum effort, were each universe level. None of them posed a real problem. Still, she waved off Diana and Kyle when they moved to help, ostensibly to spare Diana the awkward position, but in truth she was waiting for the cracks in Highfather's resolve to widen further. She blocked 7 or 8 strikes, threw a counterblow here and there, and let Highfather believe his power was growing by the moment, further confirming in his mind that his path was the right one. What he didn't realize was that his own energy was growing increasingly volatile. The other new gods watched him with mounting dread. Not enough. Still not enough. Something deep inside seemed to whisper to him. Highfather felt he was just one step away from overpowering Thea, yet that single step refused to close. The frustration gnawed at him. Come. Warriors of justice, to my side. He swept his scepter again. The citizens of Muz who had been kneeling in wait rose as one, surging toward the battlefield to fight for their master. Diana raised sword and shield. Kyle threw up a construct barrier. But in the next instant, every new god present went pale. The charging citizens of Muz began mutating mid-stride. Some swelled grotesquely, red muscle tearing through skin. Others dropped to all fours like beasts, razor claws erupting from their hands and feet. Most couldn't withstand the surge of life force at all and burst into clouds of crimson mist as they ran. Gods, stop this. Malhedrin finally broke his silence. He reversed his spear and struck Highfather, breaking his hold on the transforming citizens. The men who had once commanded such solemn respect now wore a face twisted into something from the pits of hell. Malhedrin, you ungrateful cur, have you forgotten who saved your life on Apocalypse? Malhedrin, the taciturn commander of the Melee Legion, had always kept a low profile on New Genesis. Unlike the native-born commanders, he defected from Apocalypse. He fought at the front of every battle but had never earned much respect for it. He pulled off his helmet, revealing a gaunt face laced with scars. Defying you doesn't sit well with me. That's true. You saved my life once, and I've never forgotten it. But I remember something else more clearly. My people's sacrifices. The desperate escape that nearly killed us all. And the one rule on Apocalypse, you cannot disobey Darkseid. No one could. We had no freedom to question, only room to obey. So let me tell you this. He hurled his helmet aside and roared, I didn't flee Apocalypse to serve another tyrant. His words struck like lightning through Highfather's mind. The leader who had always maintained his composure, always stood ready to stamp out evil, froze. What am I doing? What's happened to me? His eyes swept across the mutated citizens of Muz, and he felt a chill sink to his very bones. Those grotesque, inhuman shapes hadn't come from the White Lantern. They hadn't come from the life equation. They'd come from him, from the deepest recesses of his heart, already corrupted long before he'd realized it. My soul is this twisted. His core belief shattered in an instant. He could no longer sustain his state. Golden blood burst from his mouth. A small cyan vortex tore free from his body as if fleeing something unclean. The new god's eyes were drawn to it, but before any of them could make out what it was, Thea's hand snapped out and caught it. She recognized it immediately, the godhood of justice. She looked at the justice in her palm and sighed. The godhood was damaged. On a cosmic scale, this meant the force of justice across the universe was receding. Evil would be emboldened. She didn't particularly care about that. Highfather had retreated entirely into his own psyche. He didn't even notice justice abandoning him, only muttering incoherently to himself. Thea flicked a finger toward his scepter, and a far weaker mote of white light drifted free. She scored a line across it with her nail, then tossed it to Kyle. The White Lantern still needs you. I can't think of anyone more suited to the name Torchbearer. Then she examined the transparent, colorless orb of light spinning in her palm. The path to acquiring the life equation had been somewhat convoluted, but the result was more than satisfactory. Buy one, get one free, she'd even brought back the godhood of justice for Diana. Uga and Orion wanted her to return justice to Highfather, but under the quiet weight of her appraising gaze, both backed down. Perhaps Diana was a better fit to lead New Genesis after all. If they refused Diana now, they'd be making an enemy of the underworld. If they accepted, they'd gain an ironclad ally, and the next time someone died in battle, they could come back. That single perk alone was impossible to refuse. As for whether fighting alongside liches and undead knights was technically just, that question could be shelved for now. Seeing no objections, Thea handed the godhood of justice to Diana. Justice has been damaged. It needs mending, and I believe you're the only one worthy of it. Diana understood she stood at a crossroads. If she stepped forward, things would stabilize. If she stepped back, all bets were off. New Genesis and the underworld lacked a foundation of trust, and she was the foundation. She accepted justice without hesitation. The godhood sensed the conviction in her heart and, offering little resistance, began to merge with her. The godhood severed its own connection to Highfather. The old man, face contorted in anguish, finally staggered to his feet. The new gods shifted uncomfortably. They'd just tacitly pledged allegiance to a new leader, and here the old one was standing back up. Nobody knew whether to advance or retreat. Only Orion remained firmly at Highfather's side. Highfather waved them off. I've come to my senses. But the damage is done. He gestured toward the bestial citizens of Muz. Can the goddess of death restore them? Thea glanced back at the creatures, then considered the question. Their transformation is complete and irreversible. Their memories and personalities are gone entirely. I'm afraid recovery isn't possible. Highfather's expression was pure anguish. The light surrounding him flickered, brightening and dimming in turns. It was a long time before it steadied. Thea noticed two more godhoods leave him, Order and Light, if she wasn't mistaken. She didn't intercept them. She'd known since Diana stole a sword and ran off to fight Ares as a child that the woman had never been one for rigid conformity. And Thea herself had no love for the total absence of privacy that came with Light. She let Order and Light drift away. Whoever had the affinity could claim them. Justice, fairness, benevolence, order, and light. Now justice, order, and light had all departed. Highfather's power dropped like a stone. Even his cosmic alignment slid from the side of justice down to neutral. New Genesis is yours now. I hope Her Majesty Diana will learn from my mistakes and never repeat them. Highfather's armor dissolved into robes, his gleaming golden scepter into a walking cane. Like a man dictating his last will, he nodded to each new god in turn. Father, I'm coming with you. Orion's eyes brimmed with tears. His love for Highfather was the most genuine kind of filial devotion. He would have done anything for him. Highfather cupped Orion's cheek tenderly. My child, your mission hasn't ended. It hasn't even begun. Isn't that right, Your Majesty the Goddess of Death? Or should I call you Death now? Thea raised an eyebrow. You've met destiny, it seems. I'm not Death yet. But Orion's fate is indeed just beginning. His future. Her voice dropped below what the other new gods could hear. Highfather smiled gently. Good. That's good. Father, where will you go? Highfather's gaze was heavy with guilt. Everywhere he looked, the citizens of Muz were tearing at each other like animals, devouring and killing without reason. I'm going to help them find their way back to civilization. If their memories are gone, they'll start over. If their home is destroyed, it will be rebuilt. I will atone for what I've done here. The new gods surveyed the landscape of beasts. Restoring them to anything resembling civilized beings was no small task. Without a few thousand years, there was no returning to what they'd been before. Thea felt a twinge of guilt. Her own permissiveness had let Highfather reach this point. She raised her right hand, and a mountain thousands of meters tall erupted from the earth. This mountain bears my mark of death. Living beings near the mountain will gradually recover fragments of their memories. Over time, it may add up. I hope it helps. Then she gathered Diana, still in the midst of merging with justice, and returned to New Genesis. The new gods departed one by one, each harboring their own thoughts, though all bade Highfather farewell. Highfather stood with his back to them and bore it all in silence. His era was over. Chapter 1039, Chapter 1038, Alliance. Back on New Genesis, Thea didn't overstep her bounds. Each of the new gods went off to handle their own duties. She was no longer an employee here. Her status was more akin to a leader's consort and visiting dignitary. The life equation was officially in hand. Nobody mentioned it, as though they didn't know, and she was happy not to explain. Before she could study it in detail, Kyle Rayner came looking for her, wanting to ask about the emotional spectrum depleting again. Speaking personally, I'd obviously prefer to see the Green Lantern Corps rebuilt. They're indispensable. You can't sacrifice the present for the sake of the future, that's where I stand. Kyle's attachment to the Green Lanterns ran deep. Even now, wearing the White Lantern ring, he still considered himself a Green Lantern at heart. But if it depletes again, do you have a solution? After being thoroughly brainwashed by Saint Walker over the years, Kyle had developed a healthy respect for Thea. He wasn't about to prostrate himself, but in his mind she'd reached something like living saint status. Sure. What is it? Kyle's face lit up. Thea gave him an odd look. You. The solution to emotional spectrum depletion is you. If it depletes again, I'll just pull the present-day you forward through the timeline. Problem solved. Kyle stared at her, completely lost. It took him a solid minute to work through the logic. You're saying that billions of years from now, when the spectrum depletes again, you'd yank the current me into the future. The mental image of being dragged out every few eons to have his corpse flogged, to slam into the source wall, was not exactly a pretty picture. He'd actually been mulling over finding a successor, a generational torch-passing system to handle future cosmic crises, each torchbearer handing the White Lantern down to the next. Now Thea had casually proposed the most elegant shortcut imaginable: lock onto one guy and run him into the wall on a recurring schedule. Just him. Forever. Charming. 1 crash didn't kill him. 2 crashes didn't kill him. Every time a crisis hit, drag him out for another impact, then toss him back to lie there until the next one. His mission wouldn't end until the universe itself expired. Kyle had a nagging feeling this plan was both absurd and somehow the most airtight option on the table. Thea had always sensed something was off about Kyle. This time, when he'd emerged from the source wall, she'd finally pinpointed the issue. His situation was similar to Batman's. By voluntarily crashing into the source wall, he'd fractured his own timeline completely. Even with Thea's perception, she couldn't tell whether the Kyle who'd entered the wall and the Kyle standing in front of her were the same person. His essence was unchanged, but the Kyle chatting with her right now might well be a version of himself from some point billions of years in the future, one who'd emerged from the source wall at a different node. On Kyle Rayner's timeline, he existed the way a speedster might, with multiple versions of himself coexisting simultaneously, all because of the source wall. The wall had split him in two, the before and the after. The Kyle who went in might be version A, the one who came out might be version D. That was also why he could wield all 7 emotional colors. Through countless accumulated lifetimes in the future, he'd mastered the White Lantern, and because the source wall severed the link between entry and exit, that mastery fed backward to the origin point. None of this was worth explaining to Kyle. It would only add to his psychological burden without any upside. She dismissed him back to OA with an answer that sounded like a joke. Believe it or not, either way, they had billions of years. Plenty of time. She was a deity who could live for countless years and she wasn't worried. The Green Lantern Corps, a bunch of mortals, were overthinking it. She stayed by Diana's side in silence and began studying the life equation. This force existed on a plane far above the distinction between good and evil. It was like a program. Once activated, it wouldn't stop. It would simply keep releasing energy. By Thea's estimate, the program could bestow life on any object, rewrite any being's form of existence, and turn the impossible into the possible. The concept of life and death simply didn't apply in the face of the life equation. It could make a rock speak, so what was bringing back the dead? In just 2 days, her power skyrocketed. Within the death hierarchy of the endless, she'd already climbed to 7th, and her rate of growth showed no signs of slowing. Then Diana finally woke up. "How do you feel, Your Majesty?" Thea performed a theatrically exaggerated curtsy, knees slightly bent, both hands lifting her skirt, eyes brimming with adoration. "You goof." Diana rolled her eyes and clenched her fists, testing her new power. Immense. Overwhelming. The conviction of justice fed her a boundless stream of strength. It felt as though she could shatter a planet with a flick of her wrist and annihilate any enemy. If she faced Krona again now, she'd last at least several dozen rounds. Then she looked at Thea, and the longer she looked, the stranger it seemed. "Why do I feel like you've gotten weaker? Are your injuries still healing? I think I could push you around now." She pinched Thea's cheek. Good elasticity, but this didn't feel like a deity. Thea swatted her hand away. "There's an Eastern saying, return to simplicity. That's roughly where I am. Approaching the absolute peak, all energy drawn inward. On the surface, I look no different from an ordinary person." Privately, she wanted to grumble about it too. A max-level account forced to masquerade as a level 1 newbie, just waiting for some fool to pick a fight and get face-slapped. But at this stage of development, it was an inevitable process. Lucifer did it all the time, strolling through the mortal world as a regular person. God was even worse, manifesting an avatar as a dog, without a shred of powerful being energy. She latched onto Diana's arm and put on her most pitiful expression. "From now on, I'll need your majesty to protect this helpless little maiden." Diana knew she was clowning around and finally let go of her worry. Her beloved had already transcended some threshold, and she was rather proud of that. 3 more days passed before Diana's coronation ceremony was formally held. Every new god attended. The Magic Legion had risen to prominence as the new power center, but Highfather's former guard couldn't accept the change. Even with Orion pleading, more than half of them walked out. As the underworld's head of state, Thea watched from the viewing platform throughout, offering no comment. But she committed every one of those saboteurs to memory. "Stay alive as long as you can. You really don't want to end up in my hands." After the coronation, in the interest of promoting harmonious coexistence and the new strategic partnership between New Genesis and the underworld, the 2 leaders selflessly locked themselves behind closed doors and continued their talks late into the night. They talked, and the talks grew deeper and deeper. The next morning, the new gods noticed their new god queen's gait was a touch unusual, while the goddess of death's voice had gone a bit hoarse. Of course, the process was beside the point. Everyone was practical, results were what mattered. And the result of their marathon discussion was that both sides agreed their cooperation could stand to be even closer. Chapter 1040, Chapter 1039, The Final Step. Without Highfather, New Genesis had lost a major combat asset. Its top-tier fighting strength had dropped by roughly 30%. Even setting aside personal misgivings, Diana commanding Orion and Uga still left something to be desired. At the lower levels, ordinary soldiers needed time to transfer their faith from Highfather to Diana. That, too, was a gradual process. In New Genesis's current state of upheaval, the strategic partnership with the underworld was invaluable. The term, strategic partnership, didn't sound like much, but it helped that the two leaders' personal bond was ironclad. The treaty was mainly there to keep the rank and file satisfied. If the need arose, it would instantly become an ironclad alliance. Justice was weakened at the moment, but with the neutral faction backing it, even if every high-ranking demon in hell came pouring out, it wouldn't be enough. And the demons were hardly in a position to try, they were still locked in a war of attrition with Apocalypse. Apocalypse had suffered enormous losses, and the demons had been battered just as badly. Fighting Apocalypse, New Genesis, and the underworld on three fronts simultaneously. Even demons weren't that reckless. Thea's strength now comfortably exceeded Trigon's. If he dared come for her, the only outcome was death. In the current landscape, outside of God, the great evil beast, Lucifer, Michael, and Destiny of the Endless, she had no enemy in sight. And she was on the verge of surpassing even Destiny. After a stay of roughly 10 days on New Genesis, Thea prepared to head home to continue growing her power. Diana had a web of relationships to untangle, and spending every day holed up in the palace for deep discussions meant neither of them was getting much actual work done. This is so annoying, are you going back to Earth? How do you even manage the underworld? Diana was reluctant to see her go but knew her own schedule was packed. She needed to focus. God Queen was a heavy burden. It pressed down on her shoulders like a physical weight, and she no longer had the bandwidth to keep tabs on Earth. A God Queen flying to Earth to tow cargo ships and lift airplanes, that was beneath the title. More critically, she simply didn't have the time. The tangled, Byzantine mess of administrative affairs demanded her attention, and she desperately wanted to know how Thea kept the underworld running smoothly while still finding time to wander the world. Thea blinked, unsure how to answer. The underworld was a one-woman show, pure autocracy, nothing like New Genesis's endless deliberation and democratic theater. One order, handed down, do as you're told. Simple. Efficient. But she couldn't say that to Diana. Inheriting the tradition of ancient Greek city-states, Diana had always championed democratic governance, and New Genesis operated on a similar model. Rolling back to autocracy would undermine both her authority and the foundation of her rule. Earth's meritocratic approach, promote the capable, demote the incompetent, didn't apply here either. Every important post was held by a new god, and ordinary citizens couldn't compete with them. Thea racked her brains and cobbled together a few suggestions. You want democracy? Then go all the way. Select talented individuals from the ordinary New Genesis population. Establish a constellation of committees with various mandates. Have them compete with the new gods for power, diluting the gods' influence while building a base of popular support. Diana could then position herself as mediator between the two sides, expanding her own authority in the process. Back on Earth, Thea slipped into her normal routine. Sleep. Eat. Eat. Sleep. No one knew that an immense reservoir of energy was quietly building. Everything she'd absorbed from Krona had been channeled into her world, and that pocket dimension of round sky and square Earth was changing by the day, feeding back to Thea as an endless stream of insight and power. She moved as little as possible these days. Laziness was part of it, but the energy growth was so rapid that a moment's carelessness could trigger a catastrophe. 1 month later, the energy reached its zenith. Thea looked around at the familiar scenery and knew the moment had come. Second in the death hierarchy. One step away from the top, and the step had arrived on its own, no great difficulty for her at all. She didn't tell a soul. One quiet stride carried her beyond the universe, beyond time itself. She released every ounce of control. The world that belonged to her alone began to compress. The world will, holding slightly less than half the dominion, seemed to sense what was coming and thrashed in resistance. It didn't want to give up its current form of existence. Once the world evolved into a true universe, it would transform into something else entirely. Thea suppressed the consciousness with everything she had but didn't destroy it. In the future, it would absorb the Big Bang's energy and reach a new height. It represented the collective will of every life in the existing world, an ancient, primal form of existence. It would become the nemesis of the new universe's life forms, but that was simply the natural order of things. Without an opposing force, the constructive side had no foundation to build on. The two were contradictory yet unified. This had nothing to do with good or evil, just a fundamental rule. Her world, roughly equal in size to Earth's total surface area, began to buckle under tidal waves of energy. The handful of living beings left in it wailed and cursed, railing against the heavens for their cruelty and the Creator for her heartlessness. Thea ignored the grievances. Resentment was good, it gave the old guard motivation to make trouble for the new life forms, and those new life forms, tested by the pressure, would grow toward greatness. Today's suffering could forge tomorrow's glory. She had nothing to feel guilty about. The energy soon scoured every last trace of life away. Their wills were swept into the energy vortex, awaiting rebirth. Land. Ocean. The rough outlines of civilization. The sun overhead and the stars beyond, all of it began to disintegrate, the entire world folding in on itself. Thea decided the process was too slow. She thrust both hands across the spatial divide, reaching into the world and using her own strength to squeeze and accelerate. The whole thing compressed like a ball of chocolate being kneaded into an irregular polyhedron about 100 meters tall. That's hideous. She stared at it, exasperated. Other people's worlds compressed down to a single point. Was the gap really that wide? Nothing for it. Keep going. Squeeze. Harder. 2-minute break. Squeeze again. Harder. 10-minute break. Time lost all meaning. The world shrank to 50 meters across, roughly spherical. She stood in the void with her hands on her hips, panting. Nobody had ever told her that creation was manual labor. And physical endurance happened to be her weakest suit. If she released it now and let the world explode, a universe would still be born, just with more impurities, feeding her slightly less energy. The fundamental outcome wouldn't change much. Perfectionistic to a fault, Thea chose to keep compressing. She couldn't match God, but she didn't have to fall too far behind either. If she ended up with a universe thin on energy and missing half its rules, she'd never live it down. Compress a little. Rest a little. Until the world reached the size of a tennis ball. No matter how hard she pushed, it wouldn't shrink further. Chapter 1041, Chapter 1040, Becoming Death. If Thea used the stranger's silver coin or drew power from the primal shadow, she could almost certainly compress the world further. But she abandoned the idea. This was her world. She didn't want outsiders meddling with it. Even a sliver of energy from either of those entities would create untold complications down the line. She'd left that small portion of the world will and the resentful original inhabitants intact for the sake of balance. Whatever trouble they caused would remain within controllable parameters. Those two, on the other hand, were fundamentally uncontrollable. It was like a startup courting venture capital, avoided if at all possible. Hostile takeovers happened all too often. If earlier she'd chosen pride, now she was choosing substance. Good enough. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and murmured to herself. From novice to this moment, her accomplishments spoke for themselves. Quit while ahead. Nothing good came from excess. Know your limits. She was clear on all of that. With a flick of her finger, she peeled off a thread of the world will and cast it into the source wall. The source wall connected every universe, parallel, independent, and fantasy alike. She wasn't about to fly over to the orrery of worlds to calculate oscillation frequencies and forcibly establish an Earth 53 or whatever else. There was no need. Her universe was independent, but its rules and foundational framework had been built on the existing DC cosmology. It naturally belonged among them, and registering it at the source wall was the logical step. She inspected everything one final time, confirmed there were no oversights, verified she'd recovered to peak condition, and exhaled quietly. Then she released the compression. The tennis ball-sized world, suddenly freed from external pressure, began its final evolution. A deafening roar erupted across the silence of the void, though there was nothing here to carry sound. Thea had no time for the light show. Her consciousness rode the explosion into an experience unlike anything she'd known. Within the chaos, within the membrane between the knowable and the unknowable, the world's core spun at speeds that exceeded the concept of speed itself. When it accelerated past its limit, it broke through time. The Big Bang began. Incomprehensible quantities of energy poured outward in a torrential cascade. Thea had to anchor her consciousness against being assimilated while simultaneously observing the mysteries unfolding within. Creation, the truth Krona had spent his entire existence chasing. To witness its secrets firsthand and not look, that would have been a waste. A universe was not a grenade. It didn't simply explode and stop. Across an incalculable span of time, it underwent transformation upon transformation. Rules began filling in. Some Thea knew intimately: death, soul, courage, justice. Others she recognized but had less affinity with: evil, violence, shadow. And still others, rules she'd only heard of but never seen, materialized before her one by one. Because she was the world's creator, the rules governing death, soul, and emotion in this universe were exceptionally rich. Left unchecked, this would have become a realm dominated by the undead. But she still had the life equation. She released the faintest breath of its power, nudging life and death into delicate equilibrium. The universe's fundamental quality jumped up a significant notch. With the rules in place, the universe began expanding at breakneck speed through the void. Stars, genuine, physical stars, ignited. They coalesced into galaxies, each drifting along its own orbital path, and in that moment the universe was truly born. She put on the white lantern ring. Picked an appealing planet at random. The life equation bestowed life upon a new species, the white lantern provided the energy. The first generation of beings in her universe came into existence. Like the little blue guardians, they were born with formidable power and intelligence. They would develop a civilization of extraordinary sophistication. But the remnants from the previous age would begin their counterattack, and the war between old and new would rage for a very, very long time. A girl appeared at Thea's side, small, thin, and seemingly fragile. Thea knew what she was, the monitor of her universe. Every universe birthed a monitor alongside it. They changed as their universe changed, and when it died, they self-terminated. Thea paid the monitor no attention. Her universe was now a legitimate member of the multiverse, no longer a rogue entity operating outside the system. Playing by the rules, cheerfully accepting oversight that came with benefits. The multiverse's development carried its own inertia. Her universe, now part of the whole, could ride that momentum. It was roughly the cosmic equivalent of the way of heaven takes from surplus and supplements the lacking. Hers was decidedly on the lacking side, both the universe itself and Thea's own tier fell short. For a long while, she'd be coasting on the strength of the greater system. Established universes carrying the newcomer along until collective prosperity was achieved. There were other advantages too. Going forward, the universe could develop on its own. Whatever it lacked, the multiverse's rules would supplement. No more racking her brain to patch holes. She'd frankly grown tired of babysitting the thing. Let the universe sort itself out. She stood in the void for a long time. Insights beyond counting surged through her mind, and the world unveiled itself completely. For the first time, Thea truly opened her eyes and looked at reality. Rules covered every surface of existence. Every object, every sentient being existed within them, moving along predetermined trajectories, slowly, inexorably. Whenever something strayed from its path, an invisible force nudged it back. That force was destiny. Destiny's strength matched the subject's own power exactly. When a being's strength exceeded destiny's pull, it became free. That was what had happened to the younger Thea. But some beings were immensely powerful, Darkside, Highfather, and the chains of destiny binding them were proportionally terrifying. They had almost no chance of breaking free. Small figures had it easy. Great ones found it nearly impossible. That was her observation of destiny. She also saw herself. Beside every life, every object, there lingered a faint shadow. That was death, formless, substanceless, yet absolutely universal. Nothing and no one could change that. She knew she had reached the summit. Her black hair stirred without wind. Her face looked a year or two younger than before, though the dark accents around her eyes had deepened. The punk ensemble that symbolized death materialized on her body of its own accord, and the ankh pendant at her throat pulsed with a light unlike any it had shone before. The ring of Voltum, vessel of the emotion godhood, slipped from her finger on its own. The ring seemed to want to flee. Thea didn't even think, her hand shot out and snatched it back. A trophy was a trophy. Even if she had no use for it, she wasn't letting it escape. Hard on the ring's heels, the soul godhood ejected itself. Leave a bridge unburned, meet again another day. The great Tao numbers 50, heaven derives 49, one always escapes. She had no patience for any of that philosophy. What was hers. Even if it served no purpose right now, she was not letting it go. Her right hand snapped out and captured the soul godhood too. Chapter 1042, Chapter 1041, The Tradition of the Endless. Wealth and trade was the one most attuned to her, the godhood that was entirely her own, and even it had been unceremoniously expelled. Two godhoods circled her like lost little pets, but before they could complete a second orbit, the death godhood, likewise ejected, shouldered them to the back of the line. Well, since they hadn't fled, that saved her the trouble. These 5 godhoods were the fruits of painstaking effort, letting them scatter would be a waste. She'd keep them close for now. A thought, and a plain bracelet appeared on her right wrist, set with 5 stones, one for each godhood. The emotion godhood had been stored inside the ring of Voltum all this time. Separating it had always seemed like more hassle than it was worth, but now that the world held no secrets from her, she plucked it free with a flick of will and threaded it onto the bracelet. As for the ring itself, she crushed it to dust. Not a trace remained. The new god identity, like the mage identity before it, was officially consigned to the past. From this day forward she would no longer use magic or divine power. If someone insisted on a label, it could be called the power of death. Leaving her universe behind, Thea stepped into the residence of the Endless. A figure in long robes stood waiting, shackled wrists cradling a massive tome, silent, as though he had been standing there since the dawn of time. "Hello, Destiny," Thea bowed first, showing respect. Hello, Death. Destiny returned the greeting. An awkward silence fell. Thea, who could strike up a conversation with absolutely anyone, found herself at a loss for words with her eldest brother. Destiny seemed to read her thoughts. Death, he said, do you understand your duties? The question made her chuckle. Uncle Ben told Spider-Man that with great power comes great responsibility, and that wasn't wrong. But at her current level there was nothing left to do. The presence himself had turned into a dog and spent his days goofing off, which said it all. Being a superhero had meant an endless parade of headaches. The new god phase had been a daily battle against evil, considerably more manageable, all things considered. At the endless tier, everyone was left to their own devices. Nothing to do. Destiny governed through non-interference. What fell within Destiny he left alone, what fell outside it, congratulations, you've transcended fate, now carry on with your life. Thea's own role as Death was slightly more demanding. Ordinary deaths were handled automatically. Those who cheated Death required her personal attention, and since anyone capable of cheating Death tended to be formidable, her #1 combat ranking among the Endless was well earned. Routine duties weren't entirely absent, either. Destiny had to periodically check his great book to make sure too many escapees weren't throwing the system off track. Thea's routine was even more absurd. To remind her of mortality's weight, she was required to become mortal once every century, live a single day as an ordinary person, and die at sunset. What exactly are we now? She asked Destiny. I'm no longer a deity, so what am I? With the life equation in hand, she could feel that her form of existence had undergone yet another tectonic shift. She was no longer mortal, no longer divine, and nothing like the specialized forms of the Spectre or Eclipso. Destiny replied, what we are is unimportant. What matters is what you choose to do. We exist in this world and yet we do not. We are outside time, outside space, outside creation, unique individuals. Thea cocked her head and considered this. So basically the Western edition of Beyond the Three Realms and Outside the Five Elements. Settling into a chair that belonged to her alone, she surveyed the vast courtyard, just the two of them. It felt strange. Where are the rest of the younger siblings? She asked. The moment the words left her mouth, the oddness deepened. She and Destiny were like the eldest brother and sister of an orphanage, trailed by a gaggle of snotty-nosed brats. Our third brother is Dream. Thea nodded. She knew the name. As the second eldest of the Endless, you must seek out Dream. That is your mission. Thea gaped, pointing at herself. Wasn't finding the younger siblings the eldest brother's job? Dump it on the first warm body you see, is that it? No. She wasn't going. She tilted her head and pretended not to hear. She didn't say it outright, but the meaning was crystal clear, I'm not going. I found you. You find Dream. Dream finds destruction. That is our family's tradition. Destiny was unfazed, his cadaver-flat monotone unchanged. Dream is connected to you. Destiny opened his great book. In 1916, the Order of Ancient Mysteries made extensive preparations. They intended to capture Death. Ha! Idiots. Thea scoffed. Some two-bit brotherhood, probably on par with Mr. E or the Cold Flame Church at best, and they thought they could capture her. Any fool could see that was impossible. You will need to guide Dream onto his path. After that, his development is his own. Destiny even turned the great book around for her to read. She studied it carefully and found herself at a loss for words. The pages were nothing but one elaborate setup after another. A group of self-important mages, their wires crossed in some spectacular fashion, tried to capture Death with the fervor of lunatics. Death sidestepped with ease and tossed Dream into her place, kicking off an epic saga. Destiny must have racked his brains scripting all this. I only need to nudge him once. Correct. Thea thought back to her own recruitment, how Destiny had pulled her in and then left her to fend for herself. She understood now. This was the Endless way. Whether it was the day job or finding siblings, the approach was consistently hands-off. Make it or don't. If you don't, I'll find someone else. Cross the threshold in your family. Fail, and you're nothing. At least she only had to find one. That wasn't too terrible. Destiny handed her a list of every individual who had slipped free of Destiny's threads. From that list, she had to identify the one who dreamed most vividly. An absurd task. Bidding farewell to her eldest brother, she took the list and entered the dreaming. It was a kaleidoscopic world, and like her underworld, New Genesis, Apocalypse, Heaven, and Hell, it occupied the sphere of the gods, though Thea had never set foot here before. Dream and the dreaming were connected, Dream and the nightmare were connected too. The dreaming was currently unclaimed territory. One day Dream would officially move in, but not yet. The dreaming was relatively stable. The nightmare was a disaster zone. Countless nightmares took shape in its depths, and its darkest, most terrifying recesses connected directly to the dark multiverse, forming a conduit. Dark power was pouring through the nightmare and seeping into the multiverse in a steady stream. Destiny had put the right person on this assignment. Following the threads of destiny, she began sorting through the fate escapees one by one, judging how strongly each tended to daydream. The strongest daydreamer would have the highest chance of success, or so she figured. Chapter 1043, Chapter 1042, The Search for Dream. 10 minutes later, she abandoned that plan. Picking out the deepest, most evocative dreamscape wasn't impossible, it was insanely time-consuming. Every sentient being's dreamscape was connected here. Sifting through them one by one would take 1,000 years. She didn't have that kind of time to waste. Fine. She'd honor the endless tradition and follow her gut. It was all fate's arrangement anyway. The dreaming had no compass points. Phantasms materialized at random, land, sea, and sky spliced together in impossible configurations, and panes of colored glass in every conceivable hue filled the space above, below, and on every side. Thea pointed in a random direction, walked briskly for half a minute, and stopped. She glanced around, cross-referenced the names on Destiny's list, and selected the dream fragment that seemed the most alive. Following the tug of soul guidance, she made out what appeared to be a man on the other side. No deliberation needed. You're it. Without delay she traveled to 1916 Britain. The First World War was raging. British soldiers were dying on European battlefields. The prolonged war of attrition had crushed public morale, masses of young men had shipped out and social tensions were boiling over. Discontent spawned movements of every stripe, and it was in this climate that the Order of Ancient Mysteries surfaced. Its founder and organizer, the self-styled sorcery master Roderick Burgess, was making his preparations. His goal, capture death, for death carried matchless power and eternal life. Thea watched their preparations with an amused smile. She hadn't used any concealment spell, she simply willed herself unseen, and at her current level, nothing in existence could perceive her. Death is invisible. Concealment was the most trivial of her abilities. As Death, her timeline now ran unbroken from beginning to end. She was simultaneously Malcolm and Moira's daughter in the manifestation of death who had witnessed creation itself and greeted the birth of the universe. Independent of time, independent of space, independent of creation. Just as cosmic life and emotion could fuse to become the Phoenix Force, if you viewed the entire DC world as a single entity, it too possessed its own timeline, and Thea now existed on that line. This was why a bunch of second-rate British mages even knew she existed. On this world timeline, ancient texts recorded countless instances of her past. After all, once every century she had to die, and such events inevitably left traces. Thea watched the flurry of activity, utterly at ease. The group was brimming with energy, as though limitless power and eternal life were within arm's reach. The bustling mages had no idea their quarry was standing right beside them. Some drew ritual circles. Others memorized invocations. Their plan, as far as she could tell, was to sweet-talk death into showing up, then smash a cup as the signal to rush in and dogpile her. Half a minute of observation and she had their entire strategy mapped out. She was tempted to erase these idiots who didn't know their own limits, but the mission came first. She sat back and endured their clumsy, embarrassing performance. 13 mages worked all afternoon. After sunset, they finally began the invocation. It actually had some effect. Not through sound, on a deeper plane of consciousness, Thea heard the call. To give them a little encouragement, she offered a small response. Like a scene from a horror movie, the mages had covered the floor in candles. She blew them all out in a single breath. The group was ecstatic. Next came the blood sacrifice. After a noisy round of rituals, Thea judged the moment was ripe. With a light tap of her left index finger, she planted the soul imprint of her Sandman candidate into the center of the ritual circle. We got a response. Wonderful. The mages waited, giddy with anticipation. Thea settled in beside them to wait. Once Dream was summoned, she'd have a quick word about what to expect, fulfill her family obligation, and head home. The whole universe creation business had been exhausting. All she wanted right now was a big bed and a long sleep. But it was not that simple. With a wet burst, the summoning was barely half complete when a bloom of blood mist erupted from the inside out. Forget a living person, the surging magical energy hadn't left so much as a finger behind. The candidate was reduced to powder. Thea stared, expression flat. She froze time and stepped forward to examine the scene. Two things had gone wrong. First, her chosen candidate was weak. He'd been asleep, his mental defenses unstable. The violent magical surge had simply detonated him. Second, the mage's summoning circle was too aggressive. It couldn't so much as tug a single hair from Thea, but against a dream candidate at this stage, it was overwhelming. What now? Thea sighed. She'd known the job wouldn't be that easy. It wasn't hard to guess that Destiny's selection process for her hadn't been smooth sailing, either. What fell within Destiny could be managed, what fell outside it was a dice roll. For her, this was a one-time task, but to Destiny, she was probably just the latest in a long line of candidates. The difference between her and the rest was simple: she had made it to the finish line. They hadn't. First candidate, failure. She reset the timeline and returned to the dreaming. Before long she had picked a new candidate, someone who looked tough and resilient, and returned to 1916. The mages performed their routine like actors on a stage, repeating the whole process in front of her. Turns out resilience and magical aptitude have nothing in common. Another bloom of blood mist. Thea winced, frustration filling every corner of her being. She reset the timeline again, then repeated the process like a third-rate director running take after take. Candidates came in every flavor: joyful, grief-stricken, young, old, disabled, superpowered. The pool of people who had transcended Destiny wasn't huge, but it wasn't small, either. After the 17th failure, she changed tactics. She went back 6 months and quietly weakened the ritual circle during its design phase. But she couldn't go too far. Too feeble and it wouldn't even reach the dreaming, and the whole production would fall apart. 3 rounds of calibration later, she finally had a version that could barely complete the summoning while minimizing the strain on the subject. And still, failure, failure, failure. Watching the same group of mages throw themselves into their grand plan to capture death, once they started, there was no stopping them, had been entertaining the first few times. But 61 viewings in, anyone would be sick of it. Mercifully, just before her patience snapped for good, on what was either the 76th or 77th attempt, the summoning succeeded. This is supposed to be death. How come it's a man? Looks kind of frail. One of the background mages asked the Brotherhood's leader. Chapter 1044, Chapter 1043, Death and Dream, Part 1. Thea had been drifting between sleep and wakefulness when she heard those words. Joy surged through her and she froze the entire timeline on the spot. Every mage in the room was beaming. Only the leader, hearing his subordinate's remark, tempered his elation with a flicker of scrutiny. At the instant time stopped, he had been peering at the hazy figure in the center of the blood-red ritual circle. It was a thin young man, pulled from his own home through the dreaming as a waypoint, then dragged across time and space to this place. He was, without question, a candidate blessed with both luck and potential. No preamble needed. Thea grabbed the young man and took him straight to the endless. She rattled off the briefing, basically the same speech Destiny had given her. It wasn't that she didn't care about her younger siblings. But passing the initial screening was only the beginning, a long road lay ahead. If this one didn't make it, she'd have to pick another. If she poured her heart into sisterly affection every single time, her emotional reserves would run dry in no time. When she finished, the young man looked thoroughly lost. She could tell he hadn't absorbed half of it. Understandable, really. Anyone yanked out of a sound sleep, dragged through a psychedelic wonderland, and then told, "You are the so-and-so of the endless," would have trouble processing the twist. Thea's own adjustment had been fast, partly because she'd been wide awake, partly because she already knew about the endless. She reviewed Dream's trials from start to finish. Or rather, over the course of 77 summonings she'd studied them several times over. Played straight, they were no harder than running through a video game quest line. Far simpler than her own selection, a gauntlet of thousands competing for one slot. Simpler selection, smaller payoff. Dream's ultimate combat power would never approach hers, peak multiversal at best, permanently short of the universal tier she and Destiny occupied. But everything was relative. Her starting point had been leagues above this young man's. She had been an elite among the new gods, pitted against the likes of Necron and Darkseid. And this young man? At most a guy with an unusually active brain, the kind of person confined to a psychiatric ward and studied like a specimen. His opponents would be a clutch of second-rate British mages, and John Constantine. Yes, the very same Constantine Thea knew. Per the script, Dream also had a Hell arc and a Gotham arc lined up, both featuring appearances by Thea herself. From where she stood, those felt more like cutscenes than anything. All in all, Destiny's script was ripe for criticism. Too many plot threads required Thea's involvement. She actually had quite a few lines in this production. Compared to her own story, a one-woman show start to finish, she was a major supporting character in Dreams. "Did you understand what I said?" she asked. The young man stared at her, wide-eyed. "Fine. I'll take that as a yes." One snap of her fingers and she sent him back into the summoning circle. This candidate had plenty of time to think it over. Per the script, the mages would study him for the next 70 years. More than enough to come to terms with reality. Leaving the Sandman candidate to figure things out on his own. If he made it to the end, great. If not, she'd pick another. She changed back into her own clothes, activated a teleport, and headed straight home. Not back to Earth. To the source wall. As the pinnacle of this entire world, she could finally afford to take a good, honest look around. Walking and pausing along the wall's exterior, scanning the many powerful beings fused into its surface, she flew a considerable distance before finally locating her target. Yuga Khan, the fearsome new god whose legend once made even Darkseid avert his gaze, hung there like a bas-relief, silent against the wall, his life force merged with its substance. All that remained visible to later generations was his savage, snarling face and part of his body. Impressive. Thea had to concede that much. He had crossed the peak multiversal threshold, yet hadn't quite reached omniversal. In cultivation novel parlance, a half-step omniversal. Fire, earth, time, space, and magic. 5 godhoods. And yes, he was carrying the godhood of magic, the very godhood Thea had coveted for ages, its whereabouts a mystery until now. The truth was simple, he brought it with him when he got stuck to the wall. Being on the wall and being inside it were two different things. For the wider world, magic as a concept had been half lost. This was the primary reason the multiverse's ambient mana had plummeted and intelligent beings' magical abilities had regressed. Godhoods repelled and entangled one another. Yuga Khan had ignored balance entirely. Raw strength was all that mattered. If a godhood could make him stronger, he wanted it, no questions asked. The godhoods drove him mad and ultimately pinned him to the wall. Thea could only sigh. This was the endpoint for the new gods. She could pry him loose, but picking a fight with him served no purpose. Better to leave him as a monument for future generations. Her curiosity satisfied, she stepped away and returned to Earth in a single stride. Earth was the same as always. Perpetually noisy. Villains rose and fell, heroes were constantly schemed against and constantly clawed their way back, civilians went about their lives, enterprising social organizations still hawked laundry detergent, and elected officials continued to say things they didn't believe. Every last bit of it was contradictory, and every last bit of it felt natural. This place had a mountain of unsolvable problems, but it made Thea feel warm. This was home. Diana was still on New Genesis sorting out internal affairs. Her mother and brother were each busy with their own concerns. Thea wandered until she found herself in Gotham, slipped past the entrance security without a second thought, and strolled into the Batcave. Batman was engaged in the highly promising profession of blacksmithing. He had assembled a contraption that, to Thea's eye, looked more like a torture device, a tangle of wires and metal components with a seat in the center. She gave it a couple of idle glances and said nothing. "Are you all right?" Batman set down his welding torch and looked at her with curiosity. "Something seems off about you." She raised an eyebrow. "Is it that obvious? Even you can tell. You look much more relaxed than usual. Not like before. You always looked like you were carrying the weight of the world." Batman continued his analysis unprompted. Thea didn't explain. Her power had finally peaked, nobody could threaten her ever again. The relief was real. But none of that needed to be said to Batman. "It's a little quiet in here." After a silence, the words slipped out. Alfred was ill. Even Britain's most elite operative couldn't hold off the body's decline. Even with the best medical care available, the old butler didn't have long. Damian and Raven had gone to the Teen Titans. Barbara and Nightwing each had their own paths. They had all left the Batcave. Chapter 1045, Chapter 1044, The Promise. And in the end, Batman had not accepted Catwoman's love. The two walked separate roads, and now the vast Batcave sat eerily desolate. He could only work here alone. Not planning to train a few more protégés. No. I'm getting old. Thea clicked her tongue. By her reckoning, Batman still had plenty of years left, though the specifics were hard to explain. If an opportunity came your way, would you be willing to become a god? She had wanted to ask this since the day they met, but the fear of disrupting the future had kept the words locked behind her teeth. A god. Like those people who attacked OA. Not interested. Thea waved him off. Don't be so quick to refuse. A god can know the answer to every question in existence. Isn't that what you've been doing all these years? Even when you don't know something right away, you keep digging until you do. If you became a god, you could reshape the world to match your vision. Well. Tempted. Batman gave it serious thought. It wouldn't affect my personality. Look at me and Diana. Do we seem affected? This time the silence stretched longer. I don't have willpower as strong as yours. Thea nearly burst out laughing. Batman admitting his willpower wasn't strong enough. Someone should have been recording that. Bruce, everything about you is fine except for the chronic paranoia. It's godhood, not a brainwashing machine. You'll still be you. Remember what I'm telling you, soon, when the choice is laid before you, be calm, but show a little ambition, too. I've always wanted to say this. You are not ordinary. Thea pulled a beer from her spatial storage ring and raised it in invitation. Batman said he didn't drink. A man that disciplined was never going to make an exception for her. She took a small sip. Should I prepare some kind of investiture ceremony? Take a knee. Maybe change into formal wear. He gave a self-deprecating smile, though his face was so stiff it came out looking awful. Thea stood and patted his shoulder lightly. Time is short. When the moment comes, it won't just be you. Several others will need to make their choice, too. Personally, I'd love to see you and the other old friends seize the opportunity. But if any of you insist on sticking to your original calling and won't take the step, I won't push. Batman caught the subtext. Who else? What's your plan? There is no plan. I'm not the lead in this one, you are. I'll build the stage. After that, it's your choice. Get ready. Destiny's wheel is about to turn. Thea's words were cryptic enough to make Batman frown. Who's the target? Darkseid. It involves him. By the way, did you guess, or did you deduce that? Thea didn't press for an answer. Batman didn't offer one. A little over a month from now. I'll come find you then. With that, she left Gotham. Batman's life had been one misfortune after another. He deserved a better ending. He shouldn't die bedridden from illness, and he shouldn't shoulder the weight of the dark multiverse until it eroded his very soul. That wasn't fair. The strongest mortal sounded impressive. In practice it was a tragedy. She couldn't have done anything about it before, but she could now. Once Batman ascended to godhood, Thea could sever his connection to the dark multiverse. Then again, godhood was not purely a blessing. For some, it was another form of duty. Thea had no intention of asking her own family to take on divine mantles. That was too exhausting. The people in Star City had nothing to worry about. The Endless were unreliable in many ways, but they held one principle sacred: take care of your own. Thea's friends and family would receive Destiny's favor, not stumble across money on the sidewalk, levels of luck, but a guarantee of lifelong happiness and health. Her gaze pierced the cosmos and found apocalypse. A vast shroud of death hung over the planet, and every sign pointed to one conclusion: Darkseid was dying. The evil overlord was currently thrashing his demons into pitiful submission, and he had extracted most of the anti-life equation. Only a stub remained inside the anti-monitor. But Thea knew. He was approaching the end. The method Michael Demiurgos had taught him contained a critical flaw, invisible to anyone below a certain realm. The dying anti-monitor had also sabotaged the equation from the inside. With multiple parties tacitly allowing it, Darkseid's survival would be nothing short of a miracle. Thea had a hand in this, too. She had orchestrated the opening act of the campaign to seize the anti-life equation, so the finale had to end in her hands as well. The death of a multiversal tier deity was the perfect demonstration of her existence. She wondered how many godhoods Darkseid's death would scatter. A death on this scale would destabilize the entire multiverse. His godhoods would need successors to keep the cosmos from unraveling. Batman, Superman, Faura, Deathstroke, all viable candidates. While she sat on the grass mulling this over, her adjutant approached. You called for me. Give it a moment. 2 more guests are on the way. Before long, Superman and Supergirl touched down. Only then did Thea explain her purpose. She gestured toward Faura. I once made Faura a promise. At the time I didn't have the power to follow through. Now I finally can. I brought all of you here to ask for your opinions. Before they could question her, she dropped the reveal. I'm going to restore Krypton. 3 sharp intakes of breath, simultaneous. Really? You can actually restore Krypton? Supergirl reacted fastest and most intensely, her voice tinged with disbelief. Faura was equally stunned. She had assumed she was being assigned a mission. This was the last thing she'd expected. Superman, ever the rational one, immediately started running scenarios. Would it trigger a cosmic catastrophe? Would it crush any flowers or grass? A whole mess of random worries tumbled out. And I can resurrect Zod, too. Clark, Faura, what do you think? Superman's reply came fast. Bring him back. Killing him is a lifelong regret. That was never what I intended. Faura, by contrast, hesitated visibly. After a long pause she said quietly, the General's goal was to restore Krypton. If Krypton has already been restored, his sense of purpose may have nowhere to go. I don't know if we should. Supergirl rested a hand on her shoulder in silent comfort. Thea held up 2 fingers. There's no rush on Zod. Take your time. Here are your 2 options. First, I send you back to the moment before Krypton's destruction. Whatever caused the explosion, whatever, I can undo it. I'll restore your bodies to their original states and erase your memories of these years. Clark could grow up with both parents by his side. Kara could continue her life on Krypton. Same for Faura. Chapter 1046, Chapter 1045, 800,000 Kryptonians, scared yet? Second option, build a brand new planet. New Krypton. Before Krypton exploded, Brainiac captured an entire city. Roughly 100,000 people are still alive inside it, something I only just discovered. We can rescue them and establish a new planet for the Kryptonian people. That's Kandor. I know about this. I remember it vividly. Supergirl's eyes went wide. Kandor, yes. We actually visited Kandor 350,000 years in the past when we dealt with Rao. Faura, Kara, Clark, you're all my friends. You don't need a unified answer. Make your own decisions. Whatever you choose, I'll support it. Why don't you take a few days to think it over? A decision this monumental couldn't be made on the spot. Thea left the three of them to agonize and went home to sleep. Watching the Sandman debacle play out that many times had worn her out. Faura rarely made this kind of decision on her own. She felt a little lost, craving solitude to think, and flew off without a word to Superman or Supergirl. Supergirl was in even worse shape, completely dazed, so deep in her own head that she didn't notice Superman calling after her. Back in her apartment, she changed clothes mechanically, grabbed a throw pillow, sat cross-legged on the bed, and stared blankly at the wall. Before long, Lena, alerted by Superman, rushed home. She waved a hand in front of Kara's face. Kara's eyes were unfocused. That scared Lena badly. She grabbed Kara by the shoulders and shook. Lena. You're home from work. It took a long moment before Kara truly came back. Lena let out a breath, kicked off her heels, and sat down beside her. Kara nuzzled into Lena's arms like a pet about to be abandoned, small and pitiable. What happened? Want to talk about it? Kara mumbled her way through the whole story. Go back to the past, or rebuild Krypton. Selfishly, Lena wanted option 2. But she possessed a compassion rare among the Luthor family, and she had always known that Kara missed her old life. Given the choice, Kara would rather return to Krypton and live quietly than play Supergirl on Earth. At the end of the day, Kara was still a girl who hadn't fully grown up. Returning to her parents, returning to the world she knew, that held more pull than being a superhero ever could. Go back, Lena whispered, as if picturing something beautiful. Go back to your parents. Grow up happy and healthy. Then find yourself a handsome guy, or a pretty girl. She seemed to be imagining a future for Kara, but the words caught in her throat and she started crying. She couldn't let go. The two of them had broken through society's prejudice, pushed past family opposition, and fought their way to where they stood now. None of it had been easy. And just when things had finally stabilized, Thea had to go and stir the pot. Lena was seething at her right now. I can't bear to leave you. I don't want to forget you. Kara murmured, brow furrowed, nestling into Lena's arms. Her first instinct had been to go back, but Lena's love held her in place. That was the hardest part. And Alex, and all our friends, but I really do miss home. What should I do, Lena? Are any of the surviving Kryptonians your relatives? As an outsider looking in, Lena reframed the question from a new angle, not advocating, not objecting. The tactic worked. Kara's attention shifted. The moment Kandor was taken, she remembered it with painful clarity. For a long time afterward, the image had haunted her nightmares. The house of El was vast. Kandor certainly held relatives of hers. Friends, too. She grabbed her phone and called Thea. She needed to know who was inside Kandor. Thea was mildly exasperated. She wasn't a census bureau, how was she supposed to know who was inside Kandor? She could perceive every living soul, true, but nobody's soul came with a name tag. Still, she traced the bloodline from its root and confirmed, Kara did have kin in Kandor. Close kin, at that. Where Kara's heart had been split 50-50, the scales now tipped firmly toward staying in the present and rescuing her family. Unlike Kara's anguish, Superman had no desire whatsoever to go back. His wife, his son, his friends, his adoptive mother, his fellow heroes, all of them were here. His birth parents were gone, but the weight of their legacy had never left his chest. Not for a single day. Protect Earth. Bring humanity hope. That conviction hadn't wavered once. He chose option 2. Then, as if guided by some invisible hand, just as Thea had done, he found himself walking into the Batcave to talk things over with his old friend. Batman's thought process was nothing if not unique. He always spotted what others missed. The moment Superman finished explaining, Batman exploded. What did you say? 100,000 Kryptonians. He grabbed Superman by the collar. Clark had come in civilian clothes. Batman had spent his entire career struggling to handle one Kryptonian. If 100,000 showed up on Earth, could the planet even survive? Are you out of your minds? Do you have any idea what 100,000 sun-powered Kryptonians could do? What if they decide to enslave Earth? How do we stop them? Superman was speechless. He had faith in his people. But in Batman's telling, Kryptonians were practically a marauding horde with a taste for plunder. My people wouldn't do that. Krypton has institutions. Laws. Our civilization has the science and technology to develop on its own. We would never enslave intelligent life under any pretext. Krypton recycles and reuses energy. There's no need to plunder resources. So your concerns are really unnecessary. Batman's gut told him this was bad, way beyond anyone's control. But he couldn't exactly exterminate 100,000 innocent Kryptonians who hadn't done anything wrong. Both Superman and Thea were acting from a place of justice. Rescuing your own people wasn't evil by any measure. Early the next morning, before Thea had even gotten out of bed, their knocking woke her up. If she'd been an ordinary woman, this would have been a hassle. Fortunately, she was anything but. A single thought, and she stood at the door, radiant, perfectly dressed. Faura, Kara, Superman, all present and accounted for. They had made up their minds and come straight over. And then there was one uninvited guest. Dark-faced and thoroughly displeased, looking as though he hadn't slept a wink, Batman. Thea was puzzled. She shot Superman a questioning look. Why is he here? Did you bring him? Where do you plan to settle these rescued Kryptonians? Batman asked. My idea is to build an entirely new planet. Otherwise it wouldn't really be Krypton, would it? That was my original promise to Faura. All three Kryptonians nodded in unison. Something like a Kryptonian autonomous zone on Earth didn't need a second's thought to dismiss as impractical. Chapter 1047, Chapter 1046, The Rescue. Kryptonians are ordinary people right now, so a rescue operation is fine by me. But if they need enhancement, what's your plan? Batman pressed further. Kryptonian enhancement was absurdly overpowered. There wasn't a species in the entire universe that grew stronger faster. Thea had, of course, considered this. 100,000 sun-charged Kryptonians, lined up shoulder to shoulder, counting down in unison, 3, 2, 1, fire. 100,000 simultaneous heat vision blasts. The sheer spectacle was staggering just to imagine. Forget about her, even the Presence himself could step onto the field and still get the living daylights beaten out of him. Quantity stacked high enough could absolutely override quality. Unfortunately, no being of real power would fight them head-on like that. One reality warp conjuring a red sun and every last Kryptonian was finished. She wasn't worried about the Kryptonian problem. If she wanted, she could extinguish every star in the universe, rewrite Kryptonian DNA. It would take nothing more than a thought. Still, she offered an explanation. Kryptonians aren't bad people. You'll agree with that, right? Batman had reservations, but one glance at the three Kryptonians beside him and he nodded. Your anxiety over 100,000 Kryptonians is completely unnecessary. Krypton wasn't some warrior planet. Among them there are scholars, artists, teachers, people from every walk of life. Out of 100,000, fewer than 1,000 were actual combatants. And she chose her words carefully before deciding to tell the truth. When Brainiac invaded Kandor, the city's warriors were among the first casualties. The majority were killed almost immediately. So the real number is far below 1,000. Superman fell silent, mourning the sacrifice of his people. Faura had been exiled with Zod before the invasion and hadn't witnessed it firsthand. Supergirl was different. She'd been there. If you didn't count the Kryptonians trapped inside Kandor, she was the sole surviving eyewitness. The memories were vivid. Brainiac had descended like some colossal demon, seizing an entire city. She'd felt uneasy, and above all, terrified. Back then, Brainiac had piloted his enormous mechanical body into Krypton's orbit. With a sweep of his hand he'd swatted every line of resistance from the sky, then plucked Kandor from the planet's surface, the cradle city of Kryptonian civilization. And yet it was precisely because of that demon that Kandor and its 100,000 inhabitants had survived Krypton's destruction. Supergirl honestly couldn't say whether that was a blessing or a curse. Not everyone wants to go flying around performing superhuman feats, Thea continued. Most of them just want to live their lives. They don't deserve to stay bottled up. Supergirl nodded vigorously. She was one of those people who just wanted a quiet life. Fine. I'll wish the Kryptonian people well. But those few hundred warriors, what about them? What if some of them decide to conquer Earth? Batman had watched the estimated enemy count shrink from 100,000 to a few hundred, yet he still wasn't satisfied. Not remotely. He couldn't shake the feeling that Thea was playing with fire. Faura let out a quiet scoff but said nothing. She knew someone else would jump in. Right on cue, Supergirl glared at Batman. Krypton doesn't have people like that. We never conquer other planets. We only help them. Earth doesn't need your help. Batman didn't give an inch. Superman hurried to separate his cousin and his best friend. He was equally afraid of Supergirl punching Batman and Batman slipping Supergirl a chunk of kryptonite. Thea watched the squabble with undisguised amusement. Once things settled down, she continued. You're all familiar with the Green Lantern Corps, right? They're still dealing with internal disputes, and their numbers have dropped sharply after several crises. So you're planning to have Kryptonians help maintain universal peace. That's a great idea. Superman beamed. Thea promptly doused his enthusiasm. It can't be the whole universe. You're too dependent on stellar energy, and not every star out there is compatible. Jor-El ran a complex series of calculations before sending you to Earth. Not all stars can provide what you need. Some are in decline. Others don't match your genome. And there are plenty of red stars out there. So Kryptonians can only serve as a supplement to the Green Lantern Corps. What I have in mind is 2 teams, they monitor each other, push each other, and together maintain peace across the universe. The proposal aligned neatly with mainstream values on this side. Superman kept nodding in agreement, and even Batman couldn't come up with an objection. Where are you planning to put New Krypton? If it's too far away. Supergirl was still thinking about her loved ones. She wanted to be able to visit anytime, but she also couldn't bear to leave behind the people she cared about on Earth. The conflict was tearing her apart. Easy. Same orbit as Earth, on the opposite side of the Sun. 2 co-orbital planets revolving around a single star. Batman's face went dark. After all that discussion, 100,000 Kryptonians were right back in the neighborhood. You couldn't put them a little farther away. Relax. We can give them the freedom to choose. If they want to defend justice, they can absorb stellar energy. If they'd rather live as ordinary people, I can rewrite their genetic code. Besides, Kryptonian civilization has critical technological gaps. They'll be building from scratch on a barren world. The future Kryptonians won't be a threat. If anything, I'm more worried about Earth's opportunists picking fights with them. I'll be the bridge between both sides, Superman said. Me too. Supergirl added emphatically. All right. Looking at the 3 of you, I take it you've all chosen the second option. Thea's gaze swept across each face in turn. All 3 nodded simultaneously. What was done was done. Wipe their memories and send them back. Would they even still be themselves? Without exception, all 3 chose to keep living the lives they had. The trip's a bit of a haul. Everyone, prepare for combat. There's roughly an 80% chance Brainiac won't surrender, so I'll need you to fight. Thea had no intention of joining the battle herself. Sitting back and watching other people slug it out was rather pleasant, actually. The 3 Kryptonians accepted this without question. It was their business, after all. Batman nodded matter-of-factly and prepared to go with them. Seeing him resolve to tag along with 3 Kryptonians and farm experience, Thea didn't stop him. If he wanted to go, so be it. The world blurred around them, and they materialized inside a structure brimming with advanced technology. Countless wires and mechanical equipment lined the walls. The ceiling soared over 10 meters overhead, and the vast space was eerily silent. Apart from their own breathing, there wasn't a sound. A suffocating stillness pressed in on all of them. Thea acted as if nothing was wrong and broke the silence, pointing left. This way. She strolled ahead casually. The others followed, and Farah scanned their surroundings. There's lead in the walls. It's blocking my vision. It's not just lead. There's plenty of tech hardware too. That thing above us looks like a tracking alarm. That odd device up ahead seems to be scanning us. And there's. Batman quickly identified several anomalies. The implication was clear, they'd been detected. Chapter 1048, Chapter 1047, Brainiac. Don't get worked up, and watch your strength. We're inside Brainiac's ship, or maybe inside his body, depending on how you look at it. If you hit too hard and crack those glass enclosures, the repairs will be a nightmare. Thea settled herself off to one side. The moment she finished speaking, several sleek metallic conduits shot together with startling speed, locking into place like pieces of a puzzle. Something squeezed out from within, like toothpaste from a tube, a large mass of vivid green substance that rapidly solidified into shape. It was an astonishingly advanced piece of biotechnology. Within moments a man stepped forward, 2 meters tall, sharp-featured, expression severe. The synthetic skin was indistinguishable from the real thing. Every subtle expression, every microscopic twitch of facial muscle and nerve, was replicated with uncanny precision. This was Brainiac. Or rather, one of his mechanical avatars. Thea regarded him with casual interest. He'd anchored his existence to a data network, harvesting the knowledge of every civilization he encountered. If Metron hadn't already claimed the title of God of Knowledge, Brainiac would have achieved godhood long ago. Splitting himself into countless avatars was genuinely impressive. Hiding inside a virtual realm, most beings would have no way of touching him. But against death, against the rules themselves, destroying him was no different from destroying an ordinary person. Not that she intended to. Brainiac's fate wouldn't end today. He still had a long life ahead of him. Well, this is a surprise. Kryptonians still exist, and 3 of them at once. A red light flickered through Brainiac's eyes as he instantly analyzed all 3 subjects' species markers. Then his gaze landed on Batman. Oh. What species is this? Inferior genetic composition, crude protective garment, intelligence appears adequate. How did you 4 get in here? Brainiac scanned Batman 3 times over, inside and out, and still couldn't find anything remarkable. 4. The group looked toward Thea. Ha. He can't see me. As far as he's concerned, I don't exist. Good luck, everyone. Thea pumped her fist in encouragement. Hand over candor. We'll leave immediately. Superman stepped forward with perfect composure, placing himself between Brainiac and the 2 women. Candor? You mean that specimen I collected from Krypton 38 years ago? You monster. Kara erupted, but Superman held her back. I enjoy collecting unique things. Studying their knowledge, experiencing their culture, it makes me feel as though I'm more than a pile of cold data. I was quite fond of candor. I'd always assumed it was one of a kind. What a pity that's no longer the case. What are you going to do? Per my fundamental principle number 35, when a species ceases to be unique, Brainiac eliminates the surplus. With battle about to erupt, Batman glanced back at Thea. You're not going to help? You could handle him, couldn't you? Of course I could. But my energy output is a bit excessive at the moment. If I fought in here, half the universe would be collateral. Thea delivered the line with maximum bravado. An elephant trying to crush one specific ant while stepping around all the others was a remarkably difficult task. With full control over her strength, sure, she could manage it. But she'd only just become death. Her power was raw and unfocused, her precision lacking. Right now a casual strike would punch clean through 3 or 4 universes. Don't worry. I'll take him. Faura shed her cloak and surged forward. A blow that could shatter mountains flew straight at Brainiac's skull. Avatar or not, she couldn't have cared less. Brainiac watched it come without a flicker of concern. His musculature swelled explosively, transforming him from an ordinary man into a hulking brute in under half a second. He caught Faura's straight punch with ease and delivered a vicious kick to her midsection. Under that tremendous force, Faura rocketed backward like a cannonball, slamming into the far wall and sliding slowly to the floor. She wiped blood from the corner of her mouth. Before she could make another move, Brainiac launched his counterattack. Mechanical tentacles erupted from the wall, coiling around Faura with an unmistakably sinister flare and pinning her in place. On the opposite side, Brainiac charged like a wild animal. Supergirl tried to intercept but was sidestepped effortlessly. A savage kick to her back sent her flying. She met the same fate as Faura, different direction, same result. Bound to the wall. Subjects like Kara and Faura weren't worth his time to study. From the moment they'd appeared, Brainiac's real target had been Superman. Here was a Kryptonian template he'd never encountered before. He was very interested. Superman and Batman fell into step like the seasoned partners they were. No words exchanged, no eye contact needed. They split roles instantly. Superman engaged Brainiac head-on while Batman went to free the others. Batman assessed the 2 women's positions and headed for Faura first. Not because Supergirl kept insulting him, because Faura had a cooler head. Supergirl was still thrashing stupidly against the tentacles. Faura had already slipped on her yellow lantern ring, projecting a toolkit of constructs to cut herself free. As fellow outsiders to the group, Batman and Faura shared a certain unspoken bond. He approached the severed stump of a tentacle and planted a small device inside. The tentacle sealed itself shut, and Batman stood motionless, operating the equipment on his wrist. In under 10 seconds, Brainiac noticed the anomaly. He turned to Batman. What did you just upload into my data core? Boom. The question went unanswered as Superman's fist connected with the side of his face. Simultaneously, Faura and Supergirl broke free. 3 prepared Kryptonians losing to a single Brainiac avatar would have been a disgrace. What followed resembled a demolition site. The combatants tore through the ship's interior, shaking it to its foundations. Only Brainiac's cutting-edge construction kept the vessel intact. An ordinary ship would have been reduced to scrap. You monster. Superman drove his fist through Brainiac's chest, punching a gaping hole clean through. Behind him, Supergirl launched herself into the air, seized Brainiac's head, and wrenched it upward. A grating screech of metal filled the air as unidentifiable components scattered across the floor. Half a metallic spine trailed from the severed head, its internal wiring denser and more intricate than any human nervous system. Brainiac's head could still rotate freely. Even reduced to just a head, his gaze found Supergirl. Her eyes were blazing red, murderous intent boiling over. No one in the room understood the suffering Brainiac had inflicted on her people better than she did. Her only regret was that she'd been powerless to save her people when it mattered. Kryptonian woman, you cannot kill me. I don't know how you got in here, but do you really believe you can defeat me inside my own body? Brainiac's face twisted into a mocking grin. Supergirl squeezed with both hands, determined to crush his head. Resurrection. Then she'd crush it again. Chapter 1049, Chapter 1048, Zor-El. Calm down. Thea's voice hit her like ice water poured straight over her head. The rage that had been spiraling toward the breaking point snapped back under control in an instant. Brainiac couldn't see Thea. He was baffled. What was wrong with this Kryptonian woman? How did she go from volcanic fury to dead calm in a heartbeat? Then the Kryptonian woman's next words made him panic. Thea, what do we do with this guy? At first he assumed she was using some kind of long-range communicator. But Brainiac ran 3 separate checks and tested scanning systems from 39 advanced civilizations. Not a single frequency capable of supporting a basic transmission was present in this space. There was someone else here. Not 4 intruders, but 5. Brainiac was rattled. He deployed even more detection methods, from the severed head, from every sensor across the entire ship, from probes buried deep in distant corners of the cosmos. The results were unanimous, there was no one. No invisible person of any kind. Thea didn't bother with him. The Brainiac that had once loomed like a mountain was, by her current standards, nothing at all. She gestured for Supergirl to hand the head to Batman. Batman didn't disappoint. He uploaded several strings of code directly into Brainiac's data core. What is that stuff? Supergirl squinted at the stream of data. Completely over her head. Fear described in digital format. Thea recognized it at a glance. Batman was a genuine genius. It was infinitely cruder, of course, but the underlying concept of his digitized fear already bore a faint resemblance to the presence using equations to encode life and anti-life. Brainiac crashed. Clearing the data anomaly would take considerable time. The group strolled freely into the collection chamber, where row upon row of glass enclosures held miniature cities, over 100 in all. Each one frozen in place, preserved exactly as it had been the moment it was taken. The 3 Kryptonians split up to search. Thea wandered through the displays at her leisure. Batman, true to form, was using some unidentifiable piece of cutting-edge tech to siphon Brainiac's databases. That thing survives as data. Don't bring him back to Earth. I know. Their brief exchange was interrupted by Kara's shout. I found it. Kandor. Thea and Batman hurried over. Looking down at miniature Kandor, everyone felt a quiet pang of emotion. The ancient Kryptonian city had changed dramatically. Compared to the version they'd seen on their trip 350,000 years into the past to deal with Rao, it was a completely different landscape. But the modern Kryptonians had preserved their heritage well. In the finer details you could still trace the outline of the city as it had been, though the wilderness had long since given way to technology. That primitive tribal settlement had become an elegant metropolis, alive with the brilliant glow of an advanced civilization. Faura and Kara began scanning for familiar faces with their supervision. Superman stood nearby, simply gazing at the traces of his people's civilization, at his own kin. Kara let out a shriek. That's Thera. Thera Akavar. She was my best friend at school. Oh my god, she and her mother are both here. Faura spotted plenty of acquaintances too, subordinates, colleagues, friends, but she stayed composed. Kara was the one shouting at every new discovery. The other 4 listened to her periodic outbursts and understood. Kara needed an outlet. Oh my god. Ra, protect us. Kara's hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Thea caught Faura's eye with a questioning look. Who did she see? Faura examined the figure, cross-referencing it against her memory. Ah. He's from the house of El Zor-El. Then, quietly, Kara's father. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone present heard it clearly. Superman hadn't expected to encounter a direct blood relative. This was his uncle. Thea checked the time. They couldn't linger. Let's go. We'll restore everyone together once we're back. You'll have all the time in the world to catch up. Superman moved to lower the surrounding glass enclosures. What if some of those civilizations are hostile? Where do we put them? In the solar system too. Only Batman would play the villain here. Thea couldn't be bothered to rescue outsiders. This trip was about honoring her promise to Farah. What did other alien species have to do with her? Save them and then what? An endless parade of headaches, feeding them, housing them, checking environmental compatibility, managing cultural clashes, technology gaps, climate adjustments. They were better off meditating in Brainiac's collection for eternity. Out of sight, out of mind. To preempt trouble, she'd quietly intervened while the others were fighting Brainiac. A handful of enclosures containing what appeared to be peaceful civilizations had been tucked away. What remained was a mix of dead cities and populations that looked downright vicious. Superman was eventually persuaded, and the group departed with candor for the solar system. Batman had the Yellow Lantern ring, the other 3 Kryptonians could all survive in open space. They wanted to watch Thea conjure an entire planet from nothing. With the experience of one prior creation under her belt and overwhelming power to back it up, Thea surveyed Earth's orbital path. As agreed, the sun as dividing line, 2 worlds on opposite sides. Thanks to the sun's bulk, this new planet would be invisible to the naked eye. As for those with instruments sophisticated enough to detect it, Superman could handle that. The Fortress of Solitude contained a piece of Jor-El's technology, some kind of electromagnetic interference device, from what Thea could tell. Installed somewhere on New Krypton, it would render all external probes useless. New Krypton would have a long, undisturbed window to rebuild. Earth, fire, water, wind. The 4 elements converged, and a planet popped into existence with jarring abruptness. Batman stared. This bore absolutely no resemblance to any planetary formation process he'd ever studied. What about accreting debris? What about gravitational coalescence? Don't sweat the details. Thea wasn't about to explain the mechanics. Some things could only be felt, not taught. The short version, she could skip every stage of planetary birth and simply will a new celestial body into being. And to ensure future Kryptonians wouldn't suffer from environmental incompatibility, she'd use the original Krypton template. Gravity, oxygen concentration, ecological balance, everything matched the old Krypton as closely as possible. The group touched down on the surface. Supergirl was vibrating with impatience. Thea held her back for the moment. A few precautions were still necessary. She blocked the star's light from reaching the surface, then set Candor down at its original location and initiated reverse atomization. A vast city erupted from the ground, fully sealed, its technology-laden architecture frozen in the state it had occupied decades ago. Bloodstains that had not yet dried still streaked the streets, the last stand of those warriors who'd fought Brainiac to the end. Civilians lay scattered in 2s and 3s, knocked unconscious by the overwhelming energy surge of the original capture. They would never have imagined that a single moment of darkness would last 38 years. Supergirl rushed to the side of a middle-aged man. Her father. She wanted desperately to wake him, but feared triggering some unforeseen complication. All she could do was look to Thea, pleading. Chapter 1050, Chapter 1049, Farah's Choice. Zor-El was quite different from Kara. She had flowing golden hair that fell past her shoulders, he wore the close-cropped black hair typical of the House of El's male line. He bore a passing resemblance to Superman, square jaw, slightly older features, and even in unconsciousness his brow was furrowed, as though locked in some invisible struggle. Thea gave him a brief glance. Relax. They'll all wake up shortly. While they waited, she discreetly rewrote the Kryptonians' genetic code. Apart from Farah, Kara, and Superman, the rest of these Kryptonians would never reach significant power levels under stellar radiation, Green Lantern caliber at best. The universe had no use for a mass-produced god race. Kryptonians had pushed their genetic technology too far, and the extinction-level catastrophe they'd suffered was no accident. Thea's modifications operated at the level of reality itself. Future generations would inevitably decline, their civilization might regress to a level 7 or even level 6 rating, but that was infinitely preferable to annihilation by some unknown power. Gradually, people began to stir. Kara's reunion didn't go as smoothly as she'd hoped. She'd left Krypton as a child, now she was a young woman. Zor-El wasn't entirely certain this was his daughter. Farah fared much better. Her appearance hadn't changed, and some of her former subordinates, or at least people who'd once served under her, were still on site. A cluster of newly awakened Kryptonians quickly gathered around them, firing off questions from every direction. The 3 Kryptonians were the stars of the moment. Thea and Batman withdrew from the crowd, watching from a distance. You're absolutely sure this won't bring disaster to Earth? Batman asked. It won't. None of them can reach Clark's level. Not even close. Your worst-case scenario isn't going to happen. Kandor was an ancient city, not a technological hub. You've seen the technology here. The gaps in their genetic research, the knowledge discontinuities, the entirely new social environment, they'll need years to recover even a fraction of what they had. Meanwhile, humanity has already expanded beyond the solar system. Contact with Kryptonians is inevitable. Mutual competition, mutual growth. Even if Earth's politicians decide to treat Krypton as a hypothetical enemy, that's fine. Hostility toward Kryptonians is better than hostility toward other humans. Less internal friction, better for the species overall. It was rare for her to deliver a speech that long. And it wasn't just for Batman's benefit, it was also meant for the 3 Kryptonians in the distance. Will there be complications on the Earth side? Superman didn't know a single person here. Thawra and Kara kept stopping to chat with old acquaintances, and he had nothing to do, so he drifted over to join the conversation. Not in the short term. With you as the bridge, the 2 races will learn to coexist. Thea thought for a moment, then added, actually, Kryptonian and human DNA share a surprising number of commonalities. They might even have a common ancestor. Batman nodded slightly at that. He'd studied Kryptonian genetics. The overlap with human DNA was significant. The 2 species might well share a single point of origin. Whether humans descended from Kryptonians or Kryptonians from humans wasn't a question worth pursuing. All that mattered was that, for the foreseeable future, both peoples would live under the same sun. Toward evening, Zor-El came to speak with them as the Kryptonian representative. The future positioning of Krypton, the current living situation, resource shortages, and a tangle of other issues, all requiring careful negotiation. Thea ignored Zor-El entirely. She looked at her adjutant instead. Thawra. My friend. Thank you for all these years of service. Our agreement is fulfilled. You're free. Go back to your people. The woman had served her faithfully for years, setting aside her own moral compass to carry out every task asked of her, consolidating Thea's forces, participating in every operation and engagement. She'd done it all flawlessly, and she was the most capable aide Thea had ever had. Their original arrangement had been nothing more than a verbal promise. Thawra's enhancement only required sunlight, Thea hadn't provided anything material. In return, she'd received years of selfless dedication. Even someone with skin as thick as Thea's felt a twinge of guilt. So the very first thing she'd done after reaching the apex was honor her word. Thawra smiled, a hint of self-deprecation in it. She looked back at the Kryptonians. They need to rebuild, and I don't have the skills for that. If you still need me, I'd like to continue in your service. Thea was delighted. Her other subordinates were an absolute circus. Grodd was a walking comedy routine. Livewire was half unhinged on her best day. The fierce, thuggish-looking Yellow Lanterns, the bug army that traversed the stars but needed constant supervision. Having Thawra in place to manage relationships between all these factions would save her an enormous amount of grief. After all these years at Thea's side, traveling across worlds, Thawra's horizons had broadened immeasurably. Deep down, she'd come to enjoy this life. Sending her back to help Kryptonians farm fields and lay bricks would probably feel like a prison sentence. Of course. It would be my honor. And if you're willing, accept a soul godhood in the underworld. You could serve as my deputy there. Thea had left a projection bearing the Death Godhood to guard the underworld, but a projection's strength had its limits. Thawra was a perfect fit. With a soul godhood, she'd be virtually unmatched within the underworld's domain, barring a handful like Hades. Their partnership would continue. Thea also raised the subject of Zod. The general's personality is too forceful. He'd tear apart the current structure they're trying to build. Let him stay asleep. Thawra's time on Earth had taught her some diplomacy. Thea understood the implication clearly enough. If Zod were revived, he'd seize power. Then it would be open war between him and Zor-El, and New Krypton's fragile new order would shatter before it began. They needed a measured leader, not a conquering general. Let him rest. And even if Thea could alter reality to produce a mild-mannered, genteel Zod, would that still be Zod? Better not to revive him at all. Thawra's words drew visible relief from Zor-El, Kara, and Batman. Only Superman looked slightly wistful. But everyone accepted the decision without protest. Thawra relinquished all her standing among the Kryptonian people. Zor-El, as the senior member of the House of El and an elder of the community, held a position neither Superman nor Supergirl could challenge. He would represent the Kryptonians going forward. It was only now that Thea learned the men had some real mettle. After Brainiac had abducted Kandor, Zor-El and his wife had first sent their daughter to safety. Then he'd armed himself with one of Jor-El's advanced devices and chased after Brainiac alone. Without solar enhancement he hadn't stood a chance, essentially delivering himself straight to the enemy. His attempt at talking Brainiac down failed spectacularly, and he'd been tossed into a glass enclosure for his trouble. He'd failed, yes. But yesterday's misfortune had made today's reunion possible. Father and daughter shared only one regret, that Kara's mother hadn't lived to see this moment. Chapter 1051, Chapter 1050, New Krypton's Future. Between family members, the conversation never ran dry. Kara was still chattering non-stop about her life on Earth, showing off for her father like a child presenting a trophy collection. High-speed flight, heat vision, freeze breath, she demonstrated every last ability, then landed with a face full of excitement, practically bouncing on her heels as she waited for praise. Can I do all that too? Zor-El was stunned. Flight he could wrap his head around. Heat vision and freeze breath were something else entirely. Fewer than 300 warriors remained among the surviving Kryptonians. That didn't sound like much, but if all of them absorbed solar energy, even Thea's nerfed version, well short of Superman's ceiling, 300 superpowered soldiers were still an extraordinary force. If all 300 went at it together, they'd steamroll Doomsday like it was nothing. The enhancement question was inevitably pushed to the top of the agenda. The conversation naturally required Kryptonian. Fortunately, all of them spoke it. Yes, including Batman. Heaven only knew when he taught himself. The truth is, every one of your people, regardless of role, can achieve these abilities. Only the degree varies. Thea needed to maintain her aloof goddess image, so the explaining fell to Batman. His tone was anything but friendly. You'll need to accept oversight from the Justice League. You'll need to take on regular peacekeeping assignments. You'll need periodic inspections to ensure no one is engaging in unauthorized superevolution. You'll need to. Zor-El's expression went cold on the spot. You rescued me and my people, and I'm grateful for that. But if I'm not mistaken, we are not slaves. Superman and Supergirl looked embarrassed. Batman's delivery was blunt to the point of brutality. Supergirl rushed to intervene. Father, what he means is, mutual cooperation. Her face flushed as she groped for better phrasing and came up empty. Kryptonians weren't slaves, but humans, well, Batman, didn't trust them. Bridging that gap was genuinely difficult. The instigator herself sat off to the side, fingers laced, wearing a serene smile as she watched them argue. Batman kept shooting her looks. She pretended not to notice. Finally, Superman broke down and asked for her input. How about this? I'll cast a spell and put everyone into a shared dreamscape. Inside the dream they'll gain extraordinary power. Let's see what choices they make. Thea wasn't sure whether to impose a blanket restriction or gradually ease the limitations, so a simulation seemed like the logical move. She wasn't the master of dreams, but generating a basic virtual environment was well within her reach. That would violate our right to priv. Zor-El was still mid-sentence when the virtual world swallowed him whole. 100,000 people entered the dreamscape without exception. None of them knew they were dreaming. They lived out the consequences in earnest. 100,000 choices unfolded before Thea's eyes. Some were brave. Some were drunk on their own power. And some, predictably, used that power to do whatever they pleased. Batman's concerns weren't unfounded. By the virtual world's third year, Zor-El had died under mysterious circumstances. The moderates were driven from the planet. The once earnest Kryptonians, having tasted contact with Earth's cultures, corroded at breathtaking speed. They enslaved the entire solar system and declared the sun a sacred gift from Ra. What followed was escalating warfare on a galactic scale. Eventually, their enemies launched a suicide mission and destroyed the sun. Kryptonian civilization flared and vanished, dragging the solar system down with it. Nothing gained, nothing left. Impossible. What kind of sorcery did you use on us? Zor-El shot awake, drenched in sweat. The two guards at his side looked equally shaken. In the simulation, one had been slaughtered during the coup, the other assassinated by humans with kryptonite. That was a faithful reflection of who you really are. Every decision was your own. Thea interlaced her fingers, considering the problem. The evidence was clear: give any race enough power, and none of them could truly remain peaceful. Krypton didn't even need many resources. Their energy recycling technology was already highly mature. Yet overwhelming military strength had still driven them down the path of rapid expansion. Superman's upbringing was a one-of-a-kind story. Thea couldn't exactly round up 100,000 Jonathan Kents and 100,000 Martha Kents to re-raise every Kryptonian. Even if she could, these people weren't infant Clark. Their worldviews were fully formed. Accepting an entirely new value system was next to impossible. You're right. Left unchecked, Kryptonians really would cause a catastrophe. Thea delivered the verdict to Batman with total sincerity. Therefore, I've decided. Zor-El cut in. He pointed at Thea. You seem to think you're the judge here. Our fate is entirely in your hands. I was under the impression you people had a democracy. Thea pursed her lips. Supergirl was frantically signaling with her eyes, please, for my sake, don't blow up at my dad. Then do you have a suggestion? This has nothing to do with democracy. We rescued you, and then what? We let your people enslave Earth. Wouldn't that make us spectacularly stupid? The retort left Zor-El momentarily speechless. I wasn't prepared last time. Do it again, your witchcraft, use it one more time. I'll show you the light of Krypton's hope, he said, speaking rapidly. Thea figured there was no harm in a second try. She flicked her wrist. Off they went. 100,000 Kryptonians re-entered the virtual world. This time they reined themselves in considerably. Even the Hawks chose restraint. Kryptonians were powerful, yes, but their weaknesses were glaring. If the end result was dragging the entire species to extinction, fighting was pointless. The early trajectory looked promising. But as years passed, inherited Kryptonian genes weakened with each generation while Earth civilization surged through multiple technological booms. By the time the entire Kryptonian population had undergone enhancement, humanity's army was already at their doorstep. Synthetic kryptonite bullets annihilated them down to the last soul. And when the human army stormed Kandor, the Kryptonian parliament was still locked in debate. Ha! Oh, this is too much. Thea doubled over, clutching her stomach with laughter. This is your light of hope. Ha! Zor-El's face turned an impressive shade of crimson. He still managed a defense. Even if our democratic process is somewhat slow, this time it was your Earth that invaded Krypton. That much you can't deny. Fair enough. I apologize for laughing. I'm sure you all see where your strategy needs to go. Push each other, check each other, coexist, that's the only viable path. Walk it without wavering. Thea's tone was uncharacteristically serious. There was no getting around it, these people were a genuine headache. Too strong, disaster. Too weak, also disaster. Discussing century-long national policy right now was premature, but the two simulations should have planted some seeds. In the time ahead, New Krypton would find its footing. Chapter 1052, Chapter 1051, Lucifer. New Krypton wasn't small, but with only 100,000 surviving Kryptonians, the population was modest at best. Rebuilding their civilization and establishing a new social order would take time. As a go-between, Thea helped them negotiate a deal with the Green Lantern Corps. The Kryptonians would contribute 150 sun-irradiated warriors as an independent mercenary force to help maintain universal peace. In return, the Green Lantern Corps would supply critical resources to address the 100,000 Kryptonians' most urgent needs. Both sides got what they wanted. Supplies arrived quickly, and the magistrates, Zor-El included, finally set aside their anxieties about the future and threw themselves entirely into rebuilding their homeworld. Are you staying or coming back with me? Thea asked the group. Faura said she'd follow Thea to the underworld. Superman and Supergirl planned to stay and help out. Batman, fearless as ever, intended to observe the Kryptonians up close. Fine, just look after yourselves. If anything comes up, call my name. In theory, I can hear it anywhere. With that, she took Faura back to the underworld. The former adjutant had deep reserves of her own, so merging with the source wasn't difficult. In under 3 days, Faura officially became the new god of souls. Thea spent the next half-month running things there, then left her projection carrying the godhood of death to hold down the underworld. With Faura as backup, she finally had everything on that front sorted. After that, she went to New Genesis and had a deep conversation with Diana for 2 days. Thea curled up against Diana's bosom like a lazy cat, nuzzling her head left and right. Those Kryptonians really won't become a threat. There'll be some risk, sure. But, I tampered with their genes. Each generation will grow weaker until they eventually settle at the level of an ordinary cosmic being. She shifted gears before Diana could respond. Enough about them. Let me see if your technique's gotten rusty. She pressed her lips to the warrior goddesses. A battle of tongues in every sense. As it turned out, Diana really wasn't the prim and proper type. Playing the dignified god queen day after day had her pent up, and the moment Thea provoked her, she responded with wild, unbridled passion. Oh. Seems like your combat power's gone up, MMPH. The words barely left Thea's mouth before Diana's sudden surge overwhelmed her defenses. She fired back with equal ferocity. At their realm, the repertoire naturally expanded. Why did ancient depraved emperors get away with so many unspeakable indulgences? Because absolute power meant no one could tell them otherwise. The two of them were in exactly that position now. New Genesis was their domain. Who would dare interfere? Anyone with a death wish. Free from existential threats for the first time in her life, Thea cut loose entirely, blissfully keeping Diana company on New Genesis. Between visits, she occasionally hopped back to the world timeline. The first candidate to reach the formal stage of the Sandman trials had failed, unsurprisingly. She sighed. Nothing to do but reset the process and cycle through again. The current candidate was the 14th to reach the formal stage, a man named Daniel. Handsome, with an impressive bearing, and a hint of world weariness in his eyes. Thea was optimistic about this one. If she read him right, Daniel carried memories of a past life. His spiritual power was naturally far above average, and he was exceptionally rational, much like Thea herself had been. The first 3 acts had gone perfectly. Daniel had already transcended his mortal body, and every gesture now carried an ineffable grace. Dream had 3 artifacts, a pouch of sand that had fallen into Constantine's hands, a helm that had ended up with Lucifer, and a ruby lost somewhere in Arkham Asylum. Daniel had to recover all 3 to advance further. With Thea having arranged things with Constantine beforehand, the sand pouch's trial was completed easily enough. 1 artifact secured. Hell, however, was another matter entirely, let alone prying the helm from Lucifer's grasp. Without outside support, this mission's difficulty was firmly in the hell category. Literally. This was where Thea stepped in. Several steps required Hell's cooperation, so she swept off to negotiate with Lucifer in person, like Guanine Bodhisattva quietly watching over Tang Sanzang's journey west, pulling strings from behind the scenes. She crossed vast rivers of flowing magma, traversed jagged basins of twisted stone, and passed through the carnage of countless demons locked in bloody combat. She moved like a shadow, walking a straight line toward the deepest reach of Hell, toward its most magnificent palace. Unhurried. Effortless. As if visiting an old friend. The lesser demons couldn't see her at all. A handful of archdemons sensed something amiss, but no matter how they searched, they found nothing. The scouts they dispatched died for their trouble, died completely, ceased to exist. Not even the will of Hell could save those unfortunate souls. Care for a drink, beautiful. A casual voice came from her left. The speaker was a golden-haired man in a bowler hat, brown overcoat, white dress shirt, and red tie, a gentleman's cane in one hand. At first glance he looked young. But a closer look revealed an unspoken vastness of ages radiating from him. This was Lucifer, the first angel to willingly fall into hell. Unlike those who'd been cast out, he had left heaven of his own accord, abandoning the mission the presence had given him. Thea's gaze swept over him, and layers of rules and laws flickered through her perception. Who was stronger? Hard to say. In certain domains of authority, Thea held priority. But Lucifer's abilities were comprehensive. If it came to a fight, the outcome was genuinely uncertain. Of course. Thea inclined her head. The moment she spoke, the scenery shifted. Sulfur, fire, and the volcanic hellscape vanished, replaced by an upscale restaurant perched high above a city. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the night stretched out below, city lights glittering, pedestrians weaving through the streets, the nightlife just coming alive. Thea wasn't here to pick a fight. Sensing no hostility, she played along, shifting into an evening gown that bared her swan-like neck and both arms, stepping into stiletto heels. Lucifer put on quite a convincing gentleman's act, pulling out her chair with practiced flair. The atmosphere was warm. Piano music drifted in on cue, romantic and intimate, rich with artistic flair. Thea's brow twitched slightly. Under her subtle influence, the melody shifted. A choir-like quality crept in, the tune drifting imperceptibly toward something resembling a hymn. Lucifer glanced at her. Thea wore her most innocent expression. It seems you don't care for the ambience. Let's try something else. With a thought, the restaurant dissolved. The night sky remained, but now they sat at a plain table in the middle of an amusement park. Much better. Thea didn't enjoy dining with strangers, much less playing along with someone's little role-play fantasy, experiencing mortal life. Please. Get help. Chapter 1053, Chapter 1052, Death and Sandman, Part 2. When you're powerless, you smile and play nice. When you have power, there's no need to hold back. Their brief clash had been inconclusive, Lucifer remained unfathomable, but Thea was no pushover either. I'm here on behalf of the Endless to discuss a matter with your majesty. She got straight to the point. Granted, the family currently had only 2 members, and she was by far the stronger one, but waving someone else's banner had always been her style. Why let a perfectly good intimidation tactic go to waste? Her meaning was clear, we're a family, and we're picking on you precisely because you're outnumbered. The former archangel, now king of hell, frowned. I don't fear fate. I've transcended fate. All of you together couldn't touch me. Indeed, your ability to walk away from heaven, to abandon the destiny the presence assigned you, is genuinely admirable. Which is precisely why we hope you'll cooperate and help Dream grow further. Thea sailed right past his hostility as though she hadn't heard it, pressing on with her pitch. The Endless would owe you a favor. Every other sentence, she brandished the Endless like a battle standard. She personally wouldn't owe a thing, when the debt came due, the new Dream could pay it, or the family could settle up collectively. 2 omniversal tier beings, 5 at multiverse peak. That kind of combined force could steamroll heaven and hell alike. Lucifer wore an expression that said you've got the numbers, I can't afford to pick this fight. The gentleman's facade dropped entirely, and with a casual wave of his hand, the deal was done. Business concluded, the tension evaporated. If you don't mind my asking, why did you leave heaven? Did your father foresee you do it? Thea asked, curiosity getting the better of her. He is omniscient. Nothing, no event, no being, escapes his attention. Even this conversation today falls within his expectations. Lucifer abandoned the pretense entirely, tossing aside his bowler hat, loosening his tie, and pouring himself a drink. Then your departure was also within his predictions. If so, what was the point? Thea produced a glass of her own, and Lucifer poured for her without being asked. She had to admit, the king of hell's private reserve was exceptional. 2 tiers above even Dionysus's finest vintage, with a lingering aftertaste that carried a whisper of time itself. She gave him a thumbs up. Good stuff. I left heaven because I felt I needed to leave. He foresaw everything because his attention was still here. You're saying he never truly left? No, he did leave. Moved on to a higher plane, pursuing something I can't begin to comprehend. The entire world is probably just a small toy in his eyes, no need to deliberately investigate anything. The world holds no secrets from him. Then, abruptly, he shifted topics and asked Thea a professional question. Do you think I'll die? Her answer was suitably professional. Of course. Life arrives absurdly, death arrives casually. You might be gone before you even notice. She delivered this like a punchline, but Lucifer listened with full attention. Where will I go after I die? What about you, does death die too? I probably won't. Thea gestured at their surroundings, though Lucifer understood she meant the entire world. If we think of all this as a big house, my job is to turn off the lights, lock the door, and leave. As for where I go after that, honestly, I don't know either. The conversation ended quickly. After a few drinks, they counted themselves acquainted. Whether they be enemies or friends down the road was irrelevant. Thea couldn't kill him now, and Lucifer couldn't do anything to her. Still, the topic of the presence lingered in her thoughts, though only as a passing reflection, nothing more. Lucifer's problem was that he'd been born at the top. He'd never experienced the joy of leveling up. If he'd lived Thea's life, small breakthroughs every 3 days, major ones every 5, waking up grinning from sheer progress, he wouldn't be so melancholic. Contentment was its own reward. If anyone asked right now, Thea would say she was perfectly happy and had no interest in chasing higher planes anytime soon. Her current level would keep her on top for a long, long time. Shortly after she left, Daniel arrived in hell. Lucifer staged a theatrical duel with him and surrendered the helm. With the sand pouch and helm both in hand, Daniel moved quickly to the next stage, Arkham Asylum. When he retrieved the ruby, Thea appeared before him once more. This has all been your doing, hasn't it? Your test. Daniel was no fool. With his past life memories, he read people well and was confident he'd found the answer. Thea returned an awkward but polite smile. Damn it, this is fate's doing, why is it landing on my head? She didn't realize the impression that smile left. Daniel regretted the words the instant they left his mouth, too reckless, too presumptuous. Some things you keep to yourself. Why had he blurted it out? That enigmatic smile haunted him for years, seared into his memory. Thea had no idea her enigmatic smile had thoroughly spooked the Sandman candidate. She extracted the power from all 3 artifacts and channeled it into him, one by one. Ethereal, dreamlike energy suffused his body. Daniel had started as a modestly talented ordinary man. 70 years imprisoned by the Order of Ancient Mysteries had taught him magic. Now, infused with the power of the laws Thea had distilled from the 3 artifacts, he instantly reached the equivalent of a new god. Hands in her pockets, chin tilted upward, she gestured for Daniel to follow. Where are you taking me? Daniel wore a plain white robe now, its hem embroidered with gold thread. His hair had turned silver, and his eyes held the myriad facets of mortal existence. The first traces of a Sandman's essence were already showing. The mortal world. What? I just came from there. What's worth seeing? Thea couldn't be bothered debating a slightly melodramatic Sandman candidate. The 2 of them set off on a long journey. She played tour guide, the unauthorized kind, whisking Daniel through a whirlwind survey of Earth. Without alerting a single soul, they started in Metropolis. Ah, is that a statue of you? They hadn't been in Metropolis long before Daniel spotted the monument the citizens had built in Thea's honor. No expense spared, the finest materials, sculpted by the city's greatest artists. Even now it radiated a dense aura of faith power. Impossible to miss. It is. I'm from here. And it's still my home. Pride colored Thea's voice. That single sentence gave Daniel his first real impression of her. Something inside him warmed, just a fraction. Perhaps this second sister of his wasn't so untouchably distant after all. She had an ordinary past, too. Chapter 1054, Chapter 1053, Death and Sandman, Part 3. Daytime Metropolis buzzed with activity. Office workers chased their paychecks, lawyers argued themselves hoarse in courtrooms, diner owners prepped the lunch rush. Everyone pushing forward, building toward tomorrow. The ordinary people here live well. I can sense it, their dreams are mostly good ones. Daniel observed. Thea agreed. After all, this was the Justice League's headquarters city, heroes practically stacked on top of each other. If gangs ran rampant and muggers owned the streets, the heroes might as well hang up their capes. On that front, Metropolis had Marvel's New York beat by a mile. By evening, they arrived in Gotham. Batman still prowled the rooftops. The gangs carried on with their petty schemes, year after year, day after day. I've seen him before, back at Arkham. Daniel pointed at Batman. Is that so? You'll need to guide him in the future. You'll be properly introduced eventually, but not now. She left it at that. They drifted through city after city. Oliver and his archery club were tangling with Prometheus and Silver Swan. The Flash was locked in a battle of wits with the Thinker, DeVoe, over in Central City. Aquaman was in Atlantis, locked in the eternal love-hate dance with his brother. It really is chaos. You actually live in all this? Daniel asked after a long silence. Thea thought it over. It is chaotic. But don't you think it's full of life? Daniel gave her a sidelong look, his expression screaming, you've got to be kidding me. You need to define your own path. Fate wants people to pursue freedom. I'm a friend of life, and you need to figure out what you need, or rather, what you can give to the world. We've seen the mortal world. Now let's visit the sphere of the gods. She led the way. Thea was hardly the self-denying type who'd walk past her own front door without stopping in. She went straight to New Genesis. Who's this? Diana eyed the man Thea had brought along, visibly surprised. He has, roughly a 70% chance of becoming my brother. Diana's eyes went wide. Who described a sibling in terms of probability? She had to admit, Diana's eyes were stunning. If not for the company present, she'd have stolen a kiss right there. 2 coughs. A quick explanation over the telepathic channel. Once Diana understood the situation, she cooperated fully, ordering her guards to give Daniel a tour of New Genesis. Thea seized the opening. With Daniel conveniently out of the way, she and Diana had several rounds of in-depth discussion. That Empress, she's yours? Daniel asked as they departed New Genesis, curiosity getting the better of him. She's my lover. No hesitation, no hedging. Must be nice. Heh. They weren't close enough yet for her to lay on the PDA. Hell, the underworld, heaven, the celestial realm, none posed any obstacle. They swept through each in a whirlwind tour, and Daniel's comprehension of dreams gradually elevated from the mortal to the divine. They came to the dreaming and the nightmare. The dreaming itself was the domain of the Sandman, and as a candidate, Daniel had visited multiple times. Thea had nothing to explain there. Their focus was the nightmare. This place gives me a bad feeling, Daniel said. If Daniel's feeling was merely bad, Thea's could only be described as terrible. The corruption had spread far deeper than she'd anticipated. The entire nightmare was swallowed in darkness, and the growing darkness drew in still more nightmares from the physical world, a vicious cycle spiraling toward catastrophe. Every impossibility, every thought buried in the deepest corners of the subconscious, is being dredged up and replayed as nightmares by some force. The decay here is faster than I expected. Can't you stop it? Daniel asked. Thea paused. I can't. The universe needs these dark forces to maintain balance. If it wants to grow, it has to face all of this head-on. I can't interfere too much. Then she pivoted. But you can. You need to sort through the wreckage here and restore it to normal. Find work for the younger siblings. This was exactly how fate had handled her, and now she was passing the tradition along to the Sandman. Daniel looked stricken. The nightmare before him was shattered beyond recognition. Rebuilding from this rubble would be backbreaking labor. He shot Thea a somewhat resentful glance. He'd only been venting, how had that turned into a mission of this magnitude? Fifth-dimensional beings believe that all existence, at its core, is stories. That's an interesting idea. Your task is to untangle and reorganize the stories here. This isn't a joke. This is something you must accomplish. Eliminate every reality that shouldn't exist. Restore rationality to this world. Build a system that crushes every subconscious fantasy into dust. That is your mission. She pointed squarely at him. When you complete this task, you'll become the official Sandman. She kept the briefing short. As for how to untangle things, sorry, she had no idea. Let's go. I have high hopes for you. I hope you'll become a member of the family. We've got one last stop, Apocalypse. She pulled the reluctant Daniel along, and they slipped onto Apocalypse undetected. On New Genesis, they'd been visible because she wanted to be seen. Here, she didn't, and so no one could. A major battle had just concluded. The battlefield was littered with corpses, parademons and demons alike. Apocalypse was no pushover. After suffering heavy initial losses, they conducted countless brutal experiments and devised methods to truly kill demons. The kill ratio had evened out to nearly 1-to-1. The demons had been fighting for plunder, Darkseid was fighting for survival. Their fundamental motivations couldn't have been more different, and after round of combat, the demons were losing their appetite for the war. Death, vast, suffocating death, blanketed all of Apocalypse. As the god bearing the brunt of it, Darkseid was oblivious. Victory had blinded him, and he had no idea catastrophe was bearing down. Daniel disliked the evil saturating this place. After a brief look around, he asked to leave and get started on repairing the nightmare. Seeing his enthusiasm, Thea didn't stop him. She sent the Sandman candidate on his way and drifted slowly toward the heart of Apocalypse. The demons were pulling out, a signal many gods and mortals could read, and Apocalypse was celebrating. A grand festival marked their half-year campaign and ultimate victory. No one saw Thea. She walked calmly into Darkseid's sprawling palace. Every new god on Apocalypse was on edge. The anti-life equation extraction had reached its final stage. Darkseid had summoned every new god to his side, partly to prevent anyone from snatching the prize amid the chaos, and partly because he didn't trust his subordinate's character. What if someone got greedy and tried to steal what was his? Chapter 1055, Chapter 1054, Dialogue with the Anti-Monitor. Guard against fire, guard against theft, and above all guard against your colleagues. Apocalypse's finest tradition was on full display. Everyone had greed. The question was whether you had the sense to keep it in check. Unfortunately, the gods of Apocalypse were a crew with outsized ambitions and undersized restraint. Thea watched Calibac, Darkseid's eldest son, sneaking constant glances at the anti-life equation. Steppenwolf and Desaad were likewise making quiet preparations of their own, each wary of the others, each exploiting the others. This team is absolutely impossible to manage. Thea sighed inwardly. In terms of raw aggression, the forces of evil had every advantage. But when it came to unity, the forces of lawful good had them beat 100 times over. Back in Highfather's day, not a single one of his subordinates had ever coveted the life equation. Darkseid was under the most pressure right now. He had to hold the gods in check while simultaneously being first to seize the anti-life equation. The strain on him was immense. And it was precisely that strain that cost him most of his caution, ultimately leading to tragedy. What goes around comes around. In truth, this outcome had been sealed the very first day Apocalypse was founded on the principle of survival of the fittest. Everything decided by force. Whatever you could take was yours. In the face of profit, every constraint could be ignored. Apocalypse's twisted system of advancement would make Darkseid pay the price today. Stand back. Darkseid barked, unaware that someone else was watching from the shadows. A few meters of distance meant nothing to new gods. This was really about testing how long his authority could still cow them. The answer, he was still the fearsome Darkseid. His subordinates didn't dare resist, retreating several steps on pure instinct. The tyrant was satisfied. His gaze returned to the anti-monitor. Once the anti-life equation was extracted, this husk's usefulness would plummet. Darkseid intended to make a trophy of him, announcing his supreme power to the multiverse. What he didn't know was that the very trophy he had in mind was chatting with Thea. The anti-monitor couldn't move a finger at this point, but his level was high enough that he could see her. Thea didn't draw hard lines between good and evil. She'd sat down for drinks with Lucifer, the king of hell. Having a chat with the anti-monitor, who destroyed countless universes, was hardly a big deal. They'd been discussing the anti-monitor's post-layoff career prospects. Once the anti-life equation was extracted, the anti-monitor would be completely free. He'd shed the burden of endlessly destroying universes and become Mobius once more. From where I'm standing, you're not dying today. The bit of life energy needed to reshape you is nothing to me. But why should I help you? If I recall correctly, Necron killed you last time, and it was my White Lantern that brought you back. You still owe me. Thea never took a losing deal. In the mental plane, the anti-monitor was seething. That was Dark Thea's doing. And even if you did revive me, what did you do after that? You sick Darkseid, that brute, on me. Do you have any self-awareness about what you've done? Getting killed again while already on his last hit points was not, by any measure, a pleasant memory. Still, he was in no position to push back against Thea right now. He could only play his cards, saying as diplomatically as he could manage, what about the antimatter cannon? Didn't I help you take out Necron? He was your enemy too. You were just venting, weren't you? The anti-monitor insisted, categorically, that it had nothing to do with venting. It was entirely a matter of justice. Thea didn't believe a word of it. But thinking it over, eliminating Necron had genuinely been a critical step on her path to becoming death. Fine. You look pitiful enough. We'll call everything before this even. Tell me what you can offer me now, and if I like what I hear, I'll save you once. Thea was in no rush, waiting for him to name his price. The anti-monitor tower is in your hands, correct? I call it the Underworld Tower now. Thank God this was happening on the mental plane, because the anti-monitor nearly choked on his own outrage. Have you no shame? Right, the Underworld Tower. The tower can adjust the vibrational frequencies of the multiverse, and control access is currently in my hands. Your endless family should be aware that the multiverse will soon face an unprecedented darkness, and this Underworld Tower will play a critical role in that crisis. A friend of life. Saving the innocent. Doing everything in your power to help ordinary people. Isn't that your mission? Two multiverses merging smoothly while saving as many civilians as possible, isn't that exactly what you've always done? The anti-monitor knew her principles well, and he laid them out word by word. Thea ran the calculations in an instant. The universe wanted to evolve. It intended to fully consume the dark multiverse and make it part of itself, and the dark multiverse intended the same in reverse. From a cosmic perspective, there was no difference between the two outcomes. No matter how the evolution played out, the universe as a whole remained the same. The universe didn't care about good or evil. But from the perspective of life, it was an entirely different story. Thea couldn't guarantee how many people she could save. Just as she'd told Daniel, at her level, opportunities to act directly were few and far between. Most of the time she was a chess player, setting pieces in motion rather than stepping onto the board herself, because doing so would shatter the balance between the powers at play. Thea neither accepted nor refused. She asked, curious, once you take off that armor, where will you go? She actually understood the anti-monitor's decision to abandon his power. An intelligent being reduced to a program, passively executing a single function forever, no one could accept that. When Mobius first became the anti-monitor, he'd probably lost the very concept of self. All he could do was mechanically carry out his task. It had taken 2 brushes with death before he finally broke free of that control. Faced with her question, he answered without hesitation. Away from here. Away from this world. To see new things, new rules. So, do we have a deal? We have a deal. With the terms settled, they both turned their gaze back to Darkseid. Like they were looking at a dead man. A crushing sense of dread settled over Darkseid, but he forced it down, telling himself it was the environment making him anxious. His mountain of a body stood there, silently waiting for the final result. Oppressive tension hung among the assembled gods. Each harbored their own designs, some wanted others to make the first move so they could swoop in for the spoils, some hoped the coming fallout wouldn't drag them in, and others dreamed of replacing the tyrant outright. Time crawled. 10 minutes. 30 minutes. An hour. Finally, after 9 hours, the anti-life equation was fully extracted. Wisps and threads of vivid crimson energy spiraled outward, shot through with countless black particles. Destructive energies coiled and churned around each other like a miniature universe. Chapter 1056, Chapter 1055, Merging the Anti-Life Equation. Stop. The instant the anti-life equation materialized, Kalibak, Darkseid's eldest son, the one Thea had thrashed on multiple occasions, couldn't suppress the hunger clawing at him. He took a step forward. Darkseid shut him down immediately. Thea watched with private amusement. One whiff of temptation and the men lost all composure. Kalibak was an utter fool. Even if Darkseid survived today, the throne would never pass to him. Evil didn't have to mean brainless. Darkseid, by contrast, was meticulous. His gaze swept across every god present, cataloging their ambitions, desires, and greed. None of it concerned him. He had more than enough power to crush any dissent. His movements were slow but absolute. Under the collective stare of every new god, he reached out and seized the anti-life equation. The equation seemed to weigh him against some internal standard. In the end, it accepted Darkseid, collapsing into a mass of energy that flowed into his body, from palm to arm, spreading through every fiber. Crimson energy manifested around him, faint phantoms at first, then coalescing into churning vortexes. His power climbed visibly, rocketing upward like a launch vehicle clearing the atmosphere. All of Apocalypse roared in response. Ordinary citizens panicked, assuming another natural disaster. Steppenwolf and his retinue felt something else entirely, a primal terror clawing at the deepest seat of their minds. Where was it coming from? Only Thea understood. Apocalypse was rejecting the anti-life equation. That power had no business existing in the material world, not even in the sphere of the gods. Darkseid may have received the warning too. But he didn't care. Forced to choose between Apocalypse's safety and his own strength, there was no choice at all. Barring the mad Yuga Khan, Darkseid had already stood at the pinnacle of the new gods. He also possessed the Omega effect, and now, with the anti-life equation layered on top, Three forces merged, and his power finally shattered the multiverse peak bottleneck, reaching for something higher. The moment he crossed the threshold, Darkseid's horizons exploded open. His pupils contracted sharply, because there, standing just a few paces away, calmly studying him, was Thea. Today's Thea was unlike any version he'd encountered before. No razor-edged killing intent, no mocking smirk. Just, calm. Like she was watching an old friend. What the hell? What is that look? Your true body, on Apocalypse. Instinct screamed that something was wrong. He forced himself to stay calm. Thea waved a hand. I'm not here to fight. This is duty. Obligation. Or if you prefer, a rule. I'm here because I have to be, not because I came looking for trouble. Darkseid glared at her, silently gauging the balance of power. She had to be here to sabotage his fusion with the anti-life equation, he was certain of it. Get out. You're not welcome here. Or I won't be polite about it. Heh. Hands in her pockets, utterly at ease. I won't hold the rudeness against you. Because you won't be laughing for much longer. The dread in Darkseid's chest swelled. He barked at his subordinates. Seize her. All of you, together. Steppenwolf blinked. His lord was pointing at empty air. Seize whom? Her. Was the power surge scrambling his brain? As the eldest of the new gods, Steppenwolf's mind immediately conjured the image of Yuga Khan's raving, deranged final days. A pang of pity, and a flicker of excitement. If Darkseid lost his mind, then with the Apocalypse military under his command, maybe it was finally his turn at the top. Seeing confusion and bewilderment on every face, Darkseid whipped back toward Thea. She was right there, real as stone, not a trace of illusion. His people genuinely couldn't see her. Impressive. You're worthy of being my opponent. He shifted to stalling, buying time while accelerating his fusion with the anti-life equation. Thea's gaze turned cold. He's in such a hurry to die. She extended a finger. A beam of white light shot out and struck the anti-monitor's lifeless body. Metal rattled and groaned. A bald, middle-aged man rose from the massive shell. This was the former god of knowledge, the previous anti-monitor, Mobius. He closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. The taste of freedom. Every realm of understanding and insight from his time as the anti-monitor remained intact. Given sufficient energy and time, he could climb back to the summit. Starting over from zero with all his knowledge intact. For him, the outcome wasn't the worst. He transferred control of the anti-monitor tower, or, as it was now called, the Underworld Tower, to Thea with barely a moment's hesitation. Their bargain fulfilled. Thank you for your assistance. Full control is yours, whether you use it to save creation or destroy it is no concern of mine. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. Free of his chains, Mobius spoke with impeccable courtesy, his demeanor gentle and composed. Will we meet again? Absolutely not. Confident, are we? The words were light, but the implication was heavy. As long as anything existed within this world, nothing and no one could escape her, could escape death. Mobius's certainty meant he'd found a path to another world entirely. Then I wish you safe travels. Thea inclined her head. If he was leaving this world, they truly would never meet again. She didn't know where he'd found his exit, but she wasn't envious. She'd been to the Marvel Universe, after all. Some fringe worlds held no appeal. Mobius departed Apocalypse through some unique method of his own. At first, the shadow of death still clung to him. But the mark grew fainter and fainter until it vanished from Thea's perception entirely. He had truly left. That one had some real tricks up his sleeve, didn't he? She remarked to Darkseid, conversational as small talk. Your turn now, old friend. Time's almost up. Once his level crossed a critical threshold, Darkseid finally saw the problem. Godhood. The Omega effect. The anti-life equation. Any one alone suited him perfectly. Perhaps even two in combination would have been manageable, his reserves ran deep enough. But forcing three energies from entirely different sources to coexist was playing with fire. I am the invincible Darkseid. I will overcome every obstacle. These are nothing. He was still talking tough, still straining to marshal everything he had to suppress the anti-life equation. Thea said nothing. To avoid any misunderstanding about her intentions, she took a few steps back and watched him die with a smile. A heap of negative godhoods, plus the Omega effect, the embodiment of endings, now laced with the anti-life equation. Three energies from completely different sources, yet with dangerously similar properties, forced into fusion. He'd better not die too quickly. Especially considering that the anti-life equation had already been tampered with by both Michael Demiurgos and the former anti-monitor. Chapter 1057, Chapter 1056, Downfall. I can do this. I can handle it. Darkseid's eyes blazed with fire, muscles bulging grotesquely as his body swelled at a frenzied pace. Within moments he'd become a giant over 10 meters tall, but the energy was accumulating far faster than he could manage. His brute force suppression hadn't brought order, it had triggered a full-scale backlash. Blood-red flames erupted across his body, burning wild and uncontained. Waves of dark energy rose to smother them, but only fed the fire's spread. Steppenwolf took one look at the scene and seemed to recognize what was coming. Without a word, he grabbed his axe and bolted. Desaad the arch-sorcerer, Granny Goodness, and a host of other new gods realized something was very wrong and scattered in every direction. Only Kalibak remained where he stood. He couldn't care less whether his father lived or died, he was looking to snatch the biggest prize from the flames. This evil-flavored version of father-son affection was truly touching. Darkseid had always despised this particular son, and operating on the principle of if I can't have it, neither can you, he threw a punch. Old bastard. If you won't give it to me, I'll take it myself. Father and son finally came to blows. Kalibak unleashed every ounce of his potential, lunging like a rabid beast, dodging the iron fist and raising his serrated greatsword for a savage overhead strike. But the gap in power was enormous, and Darkseid had just surged to a whole new level. Kalibak's attacks were laughable, one exchange and he was on the ground, reduced to a punching bag. The energy inside Darkseid had swollen to critical mass. Having finally found an outlet, he hammered away like a man possessed. 2 punches drove Kalibak to the brink of death. A third obliterated him completely. Body, divine position, soul, all annihilated. The anti-life equation and the omega effect tore through what remained until nothing was left. Kalibak simply ceased to exist. Sensing Kalibak's presence vanish, the fleeing new gods ran even faster. Why aren't you running? Aren't you afraid of me? Darkseid had swollen to 30 meters tall. His voice came out muffled as he addressed Thea. She craned her neck to look up at him, frowning slightly. Deep reserves, solid foundation, she'd give him that. But this was as far as he'd go. The aura of death clinging to his face was impossibly dense. He was holding on to life through sheer willpower alone. Too bad his time was up. Crack, crack, from the absolute depths of his soul came a faint, almost imperceptible fracturing sound. It grew louder, spreading outward to his mind, his will, his body. Darkseid's chest split wide open. A pillar of light punched clean through him, front to back. 1 became 3, then more than 10, each roughly a meter in diameter and brimming with unfathomable energy. He opened his mouth to call for help, he believed Thea, a being from a higher dimension, could save him. But before the words left his lips, the world around him changed. Everything was black and white. Only 2 colors existed in this place. Thea watched him with the same expression as before, and he found himself back to normal size. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, the 30-meter giant beside him, energy hemorrhaging from every surface, seconds from detonation. He knew that was also himself. The frenzy of moments ago had vanished completely. Reason returned, and he finally understood his situation. Am I dead? Technically, not quite yet. You're right on the edge. Thea pointed at the giant. When he explodes, that's when you die. Are you going to save me? He asked with a sliver of hope. Thea shattered the illusion without mercy. Not a chance. You're this far gone, who could possibly save you? She'd wanted to say she was simply here to witness this moment, but was afraid the declaration would literally kill him on the spot. I'm a friend of life. Starting with you, I'll absorb sufficient death and officially begin fulfilling my duties. While there's still time, if you have any contingencies in reserve, now's the moment to use them. Otherwise it'll be too late. Her words carried a pointed implication. Darkseid clenched his teeth, widened his eyes, balled his fists, but here he was nothing more than a dying man's phantom. Not a shred of power answered him. You won't try to stop me. Thea shook her head. Use whatever tricks you want. Whether you live or die is none of my concern. I only need to witness the death. I'll say this much, you're lucky. If I complete the rules, escaping won't be nearly so easy for you. She closed her eyes and said nothing more. The death of a top-tier god like Darkseid was a momentous event for the multiverse and equally significant for her. It involved rules of staggering complexity, and she needed to sort through every last one to ensure nothing went wrong. Darkseid gave a heavy snort. Facing his own death, he'd finally allowed a trace of fear to surface. He drew 2 deep, ragged breaths and forced himself steady. Let me out. Thea waved a hand and flung his consciousness back into the world. What happened next was the most spectacular fireworks she'd ever seen. Darkseid's body detonated from the inside out. The blast echoed across all of Apocalypse, then rippled outward through the sphere of the gods and the multiverse itself. The shockwave obliterated the palace and leveled every structure within a 100-mile radius. Apocalypse had always been a hell's cape. Now it was even worse. The entire planet seemed one heartbeat from bursting apart. Surface temperatures spiked instantly, a rough estimate put them at 80 degrees Celsius 176 degrees Fahrenheit. Only because ordinary inhabitants here carried a trace of divinity in their blood did they avoid instant death. Without it, half the population would have been cooked alive on the spot. Thea swept a glance across the surface and counted 30 volcanoes erupting simultaneously. The entire world reeked of sulfur. Earthquakes and hurricanes tore through civilian areas unchecked. Everyone was fleeing, though none of them knew where to go. There was no safe ground on this planet. All they could do was follow the crowd blindly. Darkseid's mountain-sized body crashed to the ground. At the center of his chest, a vortex wreathed in deep crimson energy churned, the anti-life equation. The equation tried to flee. Thea locked it down. Even after catastrophic damage like this, Darkseid still retained some instinctive will and residual life force. Had he been merely a new god, he might have reawakened after millennia. But the Omega effect negated that possibility. Its power of absolute termination denied him any conventional path to resurrection. The light faded from Darkseid's eyes. This evil sovereign who had loomed over the multiverse for eons was ultimately killed by his own ambition and greed. The 5 divine positions, darkness, evil, power, tyranny, slaughter, formed Darkseid's foundation, and they were also one of the world's own foundations. If his death today triggered instability, the entire universe would suffer the consequences, especially on the eve of the dark multiverse's emergence. Thea had suppressed the anti-life equation, and with it, the deeper Omega effect and all 5 divine positions. Chapter 1058, Chapter 1057, Distribution. You said you wouldn't stop me. A faint voice whispered in her ear. Thea let out a surprised, huh, and listened more carefully, genuinely taken aback. It was Darkseid's soul. The man had coveted the godhood of death for years. He'd never managed to touch either the death or soul godhoods, but he'd brute-forced his way into discovering a few tricks through sheer obsessive research. This was a prime example. He'd pulled off a bait-and switch, turned the main body into the clone and the clone into the main body. The Darkseid who wielded 5 divine positions, the Omega effect, and the anti-life equation was truly dead. But his clone still lived, and through some transitional mechanism, the clone had now become the main body. Thea clicked her tongue in reluctant admiration. Darkseid's gambit was genuinely clever. Seemed like everyone kept an ace or 2 up their sleeve these days. Fine. Go. She eased her suppression just enough, and Darkseid's soul fled the lifeless body. A streak of dark energy burst free and swept up the divine position of evil, the highest ranked of the 5, the one most attuned to him. Even with the original body dead, the divine position of evil still accepted him. He tried to take the other 4 as well, but Darkseid had never been a god of profound psychic mastery. In soul form, he lacked the mental strength to interface with them. The divine position of power wouldn't even acknowledge him. Darkness hesitated for a moment. Slaughter and tyranny stirred with faint interest, but ultimately declined. When it came down to it, every position except evil had been seized by force. At their core, they'd never truly accepted him. Thea cleared her throat, the meaning unmistakable: leave now, or don't blame me for what happens next. With no other choice, he transformed into a streak of black light and vanished over the horizon. The soul departed, and the last vestiges of life force finally drained away. The power of the divine positions, the Omega effect, and the anti-life equation, all unshackled, thrashed against Thea's suppression like wild horses. The multiverse itself trembled from a death of this magnitude. Thea sealed off external observation, thought for a moment, then activated a summoning spell and forcibly pulled 5 people to her side. Superman. Batman. Deathstroke. Orion. And Mr. Miracle, scot-free. She carved out a small pocket around the immediate area, then froze the entire multiverse's timeline. Orion, Highfather's adopted son, and Scott, Darkseid's adopted son, had absolutely no idea what had happened. They'd last crossed paths on Earth, too, and naturally gravitated toward each other now. Superman and Batman knew part of the story and could guess the rest, half-informed, at best. Deathstroke knew everything. He'd even made preparations in advance. Fully in the loop. Orion, Scott, Batman, and Deathstroke all recognized Apocalypse on sight. Only Superman was clueless, though Batman whispered a few words to him. Poor Clark had been helping Kryptonians build houses 1 second ago and had no idea why he'd been summoned. U5, something monumental has happened in the multiverse. Darkseid is dead. She didn't really need to announce it, the corpse was right there, and everyone recognized it. Deathstroke said nothing. He had every reason to be confident, with Thea pulling strings behind the scenes, securing a divine position was practically guaranteed. Batman also knew a fair amount. The 2 uninformed bystanders, Orion felt not a shred of grief over his biological father's death. He was delighted. Highfather's great enemy was finally gone. Scott felt sheer relief, no more spending his life looking over his shoulder. Only Superman asked, "We're certainly glad about that, but why did you bring us here?" Although Darkseid is dead, his divine positions need successors. You 5 are the candidates I've selected. This isn't a gift or a reward, it's a burden. I hope you can shoulder this responsibility with courage. Her tone was entirely serious. Deathstroke maintained his silence. Being too eager now would look suspicious. Better to play ignorant, whether anyone actually believed it was beside the point. Those are all negative forces, aren't they? Superman asked. How should I put this? From a human perspective, sure, they seem negative. But that definition looks rather absurd from a broader perspective. I'm the goddess of death. According to folk legend, I should be the embodiment of evil. But how many times have any of you tallied up the worlds I've saved? Exactly. A divine position has no direct bearing on what you choose to do with it. If you're set on evil, a divine position of justice won't help. An awkward silence fell. Your Majesty, I fear I can't control the darkness within me. Please leave me out of the candidate pool. Orion thought it over and spoke with gravity. A god of violence by nature, evil encoded in his bloodline, even with Highfather's guidance and the serene environment of New Genesis to temper him, he had to spend enormous effort keeping himself from losing his way in the dark. Darkseid's divine positions would undoubtedly be far more corrosive. He wanted no part of it. Do you remember Highfather's final words to you? Orion, your mission has only just begun. Think about what your father hoped for you, what he taught you. Defeating evil doesn't always require force, sometimes a more flexible approach works. If conflict could be eliminated, Highfather would be pleased too. In truth, Thea didn't entirely buy into these ideas herself. She'd just flipped through Highfather's collected sayings out of boredom during her time on New Genesis. The old men had actually envisioned resolving the conflict between the two worlds through dialogue and diplomacy. The original exchange of suns had been one such attempt. Now she invoked Highfather's name, and Orion didn't know what to say. After a long pause, something seemed to click. You mean to say? Thea nodded, confirming his guess. It's too early to discuss the details. There's a great deal of groundwork to be done first. We can talk more afterward. She turned to Scott, Highfather's biological son, Darkseid's adopted son. The opportunity is yours as well. If you choose, along with Orion. Scott cut her off before she could finish. No need. I'm not cut out for this. All I want is to live a quiet life, so you can leave me out of whatever plans, preparations, or grand designs you've got. All right, I respect your decision. Thea's offer to Scott was mostly out of consideration for Diana, a courtesy to Highfather. He had provided quiet assistance while Diana stabilized the situation, and without it, the Valkyrie wouldn't have consolidated New Genesis so quickly. Orion was really the ideal candidate. As the rightful second son, with Kalibak now dead, he was Apocalypse's sole heir. But as she'd said, there was still much work to do. She turned to Superman, Batman, and Deathstroke. What about you 3? I'm willing to shoulder my share. Deathstroke offered his support immediately. The decision now rested with Superman and Batman. If we accept one of these divine positions, what impact would it have on the future of the universe? Batman was clearly intrigued. He understood Thea's reasoning, Superman just hadn't seen the deeper implications yet.